Ryan Smith was born in 1975 in San Diego, California, USA. From a young age, he was an adventurous adventurer, passionate about traveling and getting to know different cultures around the world. This passion to discover the diversity of people through customs, languages, and tradition, and prompted Ryan to immigrate from his country. At the age of 27, this young man sought to get acquainted with the life of the countries of Eurasia, especially those that belonged to the collapsed Soviet Union. So in 2022, Ryan went with his backpack and dreams in tow to remote Azerbaijan, one of the countries of the former Soviet Union. The country, surrounded by the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains, is located at what can be considered the crossroads of Eastern Europe and Western Asia. So for a young traveler, it was an ideal starting point for the world he intended to discover. Ryan settled in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, where he studied the language and culture. On his web portal, he described how at that time he worked at a carpet market surrounded by a walled city, and this allowed him to get acquainted with one of the oldest and most valuable craft practices in the region. The methods of making carpets are passed down from generation to generation, and it can be said that this is a tradition that has almost disappeared over time. The young designer was impressed by the beauty of the products and thought about the business associated with the manufacture of handmade carpets. In December 2005, Ryan, mindful of his idea, returned to the United States to lay the foundations of the project. While on American soil, he met a young and attractive teacher, Laura Joy, with whom he got engaged, and then married her. Laura supported her husband's hobbies of travel and foreign culture, and in 2011, the couple visited the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, which borders Azerbaijan. In Georgia, in the city of Marneuli, young people got married, and both intended to establish the production of traditional carpets there. The couple had a son in 2014, whom their young parents named Caleb, and at the same time Ryan and Laura were promoting their long-awaited handmade carpet weaving project. The project, developed by an American using traditional Azerbaijani methods, everything made using this technology could be sold on the international market for more than $1,000. While Laura worked as an English teacher at a local public school, her husband toured the villages of the region in search of weavers willing to work with them. To his surprise, Ryan did not find many masters using traditional methods. Some of those who first joined the plan refused to cooperate for various reasons. Some did not agree with the prices that Ryan offered, while others were not familiar with the original designer and were not sure they could produce what the brand needed. Ryan said in his blog that he spent 4 days in Kosalari, and it was there that he found artisans interested in his project. Ryan's goal was not only to make a profit or to save the development of an ancient culture. He was also interested in becoming something of a public benefactor, attracting women in rural areas who know ancient weaving techniques to his project, giving them the opportunity to revive the craft that would allow them to support their families. Soon, Ryan and Laura Smith became one of the most respected, and the visiting American considered a city with a population of no more than 20,000 people to be the most expensive place for himself. His wife, Laura, became close to the city, with its residents engaged in teaching, made many friends, while Ryan, promoting the value of the ancient carpet weaving culture, earned respect. Most residents considered the Smith couple kind and honest people to whom they could turn for help. A couple of visiting Americans got so used to the local society, traditions, and culture that in 2012 they applied for citizenship and soon became citizens of the United States and Georgia. It was rumored that the couple planned to build a kindergarten with a playground on their own money. But it was at a time when the couple had already decided that they had finally found a home, realized that the future of their family was promising. A tragedy knocked on their doors, and all their plans collapsed in the most unexpected and nightmarish way. In July 2018, 43-year-old Ryan and 42-year-old Laura planned to take a couple of days off to enjoy a vacation next to little Caleb and get away from the routine. Sabina Talibuba, Laura's friend, said that Laura called her on Wednesday, July 4th, shared her plans to go to the mountains, and warned them that they would be gone for 2 days. The couple chose a small, picturesque place, hidden from the eyes, near the Gudori Mountains as their destination. This area is known for its trails, beautiful waterfalls, and stunning gorges, ideal for relaxing walks and picnics in nature. In this secluded corner, instead of being distracted and finding peace of mind, the Smith family experienced their worst nightmare. Ryan and Laura were looking for a local resident who would serve as their guide so that they could not get lost, and calmly, without fear, traveled in mountainous places. And the parents were also concerned about the safety of little Caleb. I would like the journey not to be exhausting and uncomfortable for the baby. So they met with a local shepherd, Malchus Kabowri, who, although he did not live in this area, but, despite the young age of 19, knew the neighborhood well because he traveled around them daily and grazed herds of sheep and goats. Malchus was distinguished by a calm character. The locals considered him a good guy. Confident in the positive reviews about Malchus, who knew the area, the Smith family hired him as a guide. It had not been long since their departure to the mountains when the couple found out about Malchus's dark intentions and claims. As it became known later, the group went out on the mountain, and having reached the clearing, set up camp for dinner. They chose a place near one of the many springs in the area to have fresh water quenching their thirst in the summer heat. Obviously, at some point Ryan paid attention to his guide, because he felt that he was not careful enough with the gun, which he always carried with him. There was a heated discussion between the two men, and no one expected Malchus to point a gun at Ryan and shoot him in the head. Then he fired another shot at the man in the back. Laura's terrified screams and the baby's crying drowned out the echoes of gunfire, rumbling in the mountains, but the worst was yet to come. Despite the woman's pleas, Malchus put the muzzle of the gun to Caleb's head and fired at point-blank range. Frightened and unaware of what had just happened in front of her, Laura turned to stone, but when she saw Malchus's cold gaze, she understood his true intentions. Her instinct for self-preservation worked. Laura ran as fast as she could to avoid the fate of her husband and son. But when she reached the edge of the waterfall cliff, she realized that she had no way out, and there was no way for her to escape. The shepherd used a weapon to force the woman to violence, and then allegedly pushed her off a cliff. Laura's body fell on the bank of the waterfall. According to the subsequent investigation, Malchus took Caleb's body and buried it in a secluded place, sending the murder weapon there as well. Then the shepherd returned to the village as if nothing had happened. Laura's friend Sabine began to worry when, after 3 days, Laura did not return from a family trip. Sabine tried to call Ryan or Laura, but she never got an answer. Ryan's entourage was also confused, as it was very unusual for him to be away for so long without contacting anyone. On Friday, July 6th, the Center for Rapid Response and Emergency Situations received a message about the possible disappearance of a Georgian family of American origin in the mountains. The caller was Sabine, who said that the Smith family had been in the mountains for more than 2 days with their little son of 4 years old, and they could not be contacted by phone. A team of 15 rescuers was sent to the gorge to search, where presumably a family was missing. Upon arrival in the designated area, rescuers found Laura's belongings and car, but moving further along the route of the small group, the searchers found a terrible find. A lifeless body lay at the foot of the waterfall. Confused rescuers stepped up rescue efforts and expanded the search area. A human corpse was found about 800 meters from the waterfall. The humidity and heat inherent in the season accelerated the decomposition of the body, so the initial report of the authorities was that the victims showed no signs of violence. In accordance with the Criminal Code of Georgia, an investigation was launched, but nothing was known about the couple's child yet. It took another 3 days when the fate of the defenseless baby became clear. Investigators managed to find out that Malchus was the last person with whom the family communicated. A 19-year-old shepherd was detained and told during interrogation that he knew where Caleb was. 4 days after the Smith family went to the mountains, Malchus led investigators to the place where he buried Caleb, as well as the weapon. The next day, the Georgian police released a statement saying that a young shepherd, Malchus Kabowri, had been taken into custody, and he was accused of murdering the Smith family. The news of the murder of a married couple and their son shocked Georgia, especially Marnuli and the community of weavers. The American consulate also expressed its alarm over this crime. In fact, the FBI team participated in the investigation together with the Georgian authorities and cooperated in the search and processing of evidence. On July 11th, the Tbilisi Municipal Court decided to place Malkus, who pleaded not guilty to the charges, under arrest. The conductor claimed that the real killers of the family were two foreigners who arrived in a black car. Allegedly, these people killed the Smith family, threatened to kill him and his family if he reported to the police, and left Malkus alive so that suspicion of a triple murder fell on the shepherd. Violence against Laura was rejected by Malkus's lawyer, because according to the guy, he was not capable of such a thing, since he was a virgin. On July 12th, family, friends, and activists of public organizations gathered in front of Ryan's house in Marmilli with toys, flowers, and lit candles to express condolences and remember the victims. The next day, Malkus's lawyer confirmed the innocence of the accused. He continued to claim that the crime was committed by two foreigners, and that the psychological pressure exerted on his client forced Malkus to initially plead guilty. But evidence against Malkus began to appear one after another. The most convincing evidence of Malkus's guilt was the autopsy report of the victims. It was found that Ryan's body had 2 gunshot wounds, one in the head and one in the back. Caleb was shot in the head at point-blank range. In Laura's case, violence against her was proven, and DNA tests confirmed that the biological material found in her body and on her underwear belonged to Malkus. The DNA of Ryan and the defendant were also found on the murder weapon. In addition, a technical examination conducted by the FBI on the phones of the victims and their alleged killer showed that there were photos of Laura's lifeless body at the waterfall in the memory of Malkus's phone. The shepherd even showed them to several local acquaintances, to whom he said that he had accidentally stumbled upon a corpse while walking through these places. Experts found in the search history and the phone that a few days before this incident, Malkus had visited various sites of an intimate nature. All this led investigators to the conclusion that the motive of the crime was the young man's interest in Laura, and that his actions were deliberate from the very moment when the Smith family contacted Malkus to take them to the waterfall. After the release of the autopsy results, Malkus's lawyer, David, resigned, saying that for reasons of principle he could not defend the shepherd. David was replaced by another lawyer, who from that moment led the case. He insisted on the client's innocence and filed a motion to withdraw Malkus's previous confession. The shepherd's mother, Mariana, supported her son and agreed with the lawyer that the police may have forced the guy to confess to the crime under threat of imprisonment. Relatives of the suspect claimed that because of a high-profile crime, the authorities accused Malkus in order to close the case. However, on November 9, 2018, Malkus was charged with the murder of 3 members of the Smith family. He was also charged with additional charges of violence against Laura. The psychological examination conducted on the young shepherd showed that he is sane, healthy, and ready for trial. The term of pre-trial detention expired on April 9, 2019, but the prosecutor said that they had strong evidence of Malkus's guilt and that he would be punished for such a terrible crime. A meeting of 12 members of the court on March 25, 2019, unanimously ruled that Malkus was guilty of premeditated murder with extreme cruelty of more than 2 people. He committed premeditated murder in order to conceal another crime, namely intimate assault. On March 27, 2019, the judge of the District Gorey District announced the decision to sentence to life imprisonment. While the relatives of the criminal protested against the life sentence, which they considered unfair, the sentence became a relief for friends and relatives of the Smith family, and defense lawyers announced that they would appeal the verdict to the appellate instances in connection with alleged procedural violations. The U.S. consul in Georgia said that the verdict provided justice for the Smith family, adding that the evidence left no doubt about Malkus's guilt. Since the arrival of Ryan and Laura Smith in Georgia, these people have won the love and respect of the residents of Marnuli, and their brutal murder has dealt a blow to the community that the couple chose as their home. The community project developed by Ryan not only revived an ancient tradition, but also provided many women with a source of income and stability. The death of the spouses plunged into sadness and uncertainty dozens of women who aspired to a successful business. Shortly after the terrible events that claimed the lives of the founders, the project was revived by foreign investors who support Ryan's ideas and offer opportunities for local craftsmen. Ryan and Laura left behind the world they knew in the West, hoping to discover cultural treasures, and while they were greeted by grateful members of the community, their fate crossed with a sinister creature who hid his essence behind the guise of a kind shepherd. Where does the line lie that once crossed, there's no return? How does an ordinary woman transform from a loving wife and beloved mother into a cruel murderer, capable of dividing a nation into two opposing groups? And how does her name become a constant topic among locals and newspaper headlines for years? Roxana Valdez could answer this question. Murderers don't stand out in a crowd, are not recognizable during dinner, and might even live under the same roof without revealing their true nature. They are indistinguishable from those who never cross that line. Thus, no one could have imagined what Roxana did on that spring evening of April 5th, 2014. And when they found out, they simply couldn't believe it. But let's start from the beginning. Little is known about Roxana's past. Despite the efforts of many Chilean reporters who competed to tell her story, they could find almost nothing about her. The only information from her criminal file was sparse. Born in a small village in the province of Punta Arenas, Chile, in 1957. That was it. Perhaps the lack of information was due to journalistic ethics, as the locals, known for their fiery temper and unique customs, might have retaliated against Roxana's relatives for her crime, potentially turning their lives into a living hell. Roxana Valdez was married to a man whose name, for reasons unknown, remains either undisclosed or unknown to the press. She had a son with him. It's clear that her marriage wasn't the dream every girl hopes for. As the couple eventually parted ways in 2011, as a single mother in a small village where jobs were scarce, Roxana faced significant challenges. In such communities, the primary occupation was growing and selling fruits and vegetables. Even the local educational institutions focused on agriculture. It was in this setting that Roxana found employment at the Don Gregorio boarding school, which trained students to become agricultural technicians. She worked as a night supervisor at the school, ensuring that students slept at night and did not engage in unruly activities. Her responsibilities didn't include the actual upbringing of the children. Roxana's son also attended this boarding school, as she worked in the fields during the day and couldn't give him the attention he needed. At the same boarding school where Roxana worked, Claudio Muñoz Ramirez held the position of head of grounds maintenance. His duties often required him to work during the night, which is how he came to meet Roxana. Despite being 14 years younger than her, they found much to talk about. Roxana would spend entire nights discussing school affairs and her own failed marriage with Claudio. They had common ground in their personal lives as well. Claudio had 2 daughters whom he adored, but felt disconnected from their mother, contemplating divorce several times. However, he remained in the marriage due to a promise he had made to her late father. Over time, Claudio seemingly forgot his promise and began spending his free time with Roxana, away from his family. Eventually, he made a decisive move. Without explaining himself to his wife, Claudio gathered his belongings and left their home. It was clear he went to Roxana, who happily welcomed him into her life. Their relationship progressed rapidly and effectively. Roxana let into her home a man she barely knew, with whom she had only enjoyed nighttime conversations. She seemed to overlook the fact that there were children around needing constant attention. Amidst these enjoyable and heartfelt talks, Roxana failed to notice Claudio's true nature. He was, in reality, quite temperamental, and sometimes even cruel. However, it was perhaps too early to judge who was more cruel between the two. The first serious outburst of aggression from Claudio took place within the walls of the boarding school. On a scheduled community cleanup day, students were assigned different areas to tidy up. Brooms, buckets, dustpans, and rags were distributed, everything needed for a thorough cleaning. As often happens, some students protested and refused to participate. Claudio, responsible for cleanliness but lacking any teaching experience, became infuriated with these students and threatened that, in the absence of teachers at night, He would beat anyone who didn't participate. Whether he would have followed through on this threat is unknown, but the students eventually started cleaning and later collectively complained to the principal about Claudio's threats of physical violence. The principal, displeased, asked Claudio to submit a voluntary resignation. It's important to note that the Don Gregorio boarding school was practically the only place in the area offering stable and reasonably paid employment. Claudio spent some time looking for work in fields and at fruit bases, but when it became clear his efforts were in vain, he and Roxana decided to seek a better life elsewhere, leaving her son in the boarding school to continue his education. They deemed it too risky to embark on this venture with him. To avoid dependency on employers, having been burned once already, the couple decided to start their own small business, a fruit kiosk. They moved to a favorable location, the commune of Molina, a couple of hours' drive from the Chilean capital. This place is well known for its vineyards, producing renowned wine brands exported worldwide. Roxana and Claudio purchased a kiosk near their new home, found suppliers for vegetables and fruits, and made their first steps in their small family business. Claudio handled the purchasing and transportation of the products from suppliers to the kiosk, while Roxana was in charge of sales throughout the day. Hiring an employee wasn't feasible, as it would mean additional expenses. Moreover, they feared that an employee might not monitor the perishable goods closely enough, leading to further losses. Claudio was visibly upset and even angry when he found out that Roxana was expecting their first child together. Perhaps it was a moment that required serious reflection, but Roxana, perhaps blinded by her new relationship and their flourishing business, didn't oppose her husband's view. She agreed that once the child was born, they would soon hand it over to her relatives for upbringing. However, it turned out there was no child to give away. Since that time, Claudio's behavior changed drastically. He often yelled at his wife and sometimes even resorted to physical violence. Neighbors from nearby houses, unhappy with their noisy new neighbors, witnessed this behavior many times and often called the Chilean police, the Carabineros, to intervene and calm the domestic disputes. On one occasion, when the Carabineros arrived in response to a call, they witnessed Roxana, in tears and almost half-naked, running out of the house, followed by Claudio. Roxana confessed to the officers that she was a victim of systematic domestic violence, which had led to a miscarriage. She even required psychological help after the incident. However, as time passed, the grievances were forgotten, and the troubled couple, as if nothing had happened, continued to live together as before. Following the incident, Claudio should have faced criminal charges, but a compassionate Roxana decided to give him another chance, extracting a promise that it was a one-time occurrence. Claudio vowed never to repeat such behavior, but his past actions with his ex-wife suggested his words might not hold much weight. Unfortunately, history repeated itself. Claudio temporarily ceased his physical abuse of Roxana but developed a habit of leaving home at night to drink heavily in local bars. He spent considerable amounts of their family budget not only on alcohol, but also on local women of ill repute. Roxana endured her husband's behavior, believing that Claudio would settle down once they had a child together. In a sense, she was right. In 2013, Roxana gave birth to a healthy child. Claudio stopped his carousing and fully immersed himself in their business, which now needed to expand. They purchased another kiosk in a neighboring area and another vehicle for product transportation. Roxana also invested in firearms for protection as they lived and worked in less safe areas. The family's wealth increased significantly, but only on paper. Claudio reverted to his old ways, squandering money on drinking and again resorting to domestic violence against Roxana. In Roxana's testimony, she recounted the escalating abuse in her relationship with Claudio. Initially, Claudio's drinking was infrequent, but it soon increased in frequency. He would come home inebriated, accusing Roxana of imagined infidelities, leading to physical and sexual abuse. Despite her pregnancy, Claudio's actions seemed deliberately harmful, culminating in a miscarriage in August 2012 that plunged Roxana into a lengthy depression. One night, following his usual pattern, Claudio went out to a local bar and did not return home until the next morning. Roxana, used to his behavior, still worried about him. It turned out that Claudio had stolen 5 million Chilean pesos, about $6,000, which Roxana had from selling her mother's house to spend on alcohol and brothels. This betrayal shocked Roxana, as the money was for their shared business and was hidden in their daughter's room. When Claudio finally returned home late that evening, Roxana confronted him about the missing money. Uninterested in discussing, Claudio hit her and admitted to squandering all the money. This was the last straw for Roxana. Without a word, she went to their bedroom, retrieved a revolver intended for protection against local criminals, and shot Claudio in the chest. He died instantly, surprised by her drastic action. Roxana, equally shocked by her own actions, attempted to stem the bleeding from the fatal gunshot wound, but it was too late. The close-range shot from a .38 caliber bullet was fatal. Roxana's desperate act marked a tragic culmination of ongoing domestic turmoil. Roxana's testimony reveals her profound remorse and recognition of the immorality of her actions. She confesses that when she went for the revolver, her intention was not to intimidate Claudio but to kill him. She recalls the countless times Claudio abused and assaulted her, and her failure to report him to the authorities or retract her complaint out of fear. She feared being alone even before they had a child together. After shooting Claudio, Roxana's immediate concern was the potential impact on their daughter, especially if Roxana were imprisoned and the child sent to an institution. That night, Roxana decided that the best way to deal with the situation was to dispose of the body and report Claudio missing, aware that his frequent disappearances during drinking binges were known to the police. Disposing of the body was a daunting task for Roxana, a delicate woman. She decided to remove it piece by piece. First, she used kitchen knives intended for meat cutting to sever the limbs and head. This process required 5 knives, as they kept dulling. Then she boiled the dismembered parts in the largest pots she had, all while playing with her young daughter, who was oblivious to her mother's actions and her father's fate. Roxana's calculated approach to disposing of the body while maintaining a semblance of normalcy for her daughter highlights the complexity and desperation of her situation. The day after cooking and cooling the body parts, Roxana packed them into plastic containers, organizing them separately: hands, legs, head, and torso. Each container was then placed in a garbage bag. She loaded them into her car and headed to St. Lucia to scatter the bags on a vacant lot. Before leaving, she thoroughly cleaned her house with bleach. However, once in St. Lucia, she couldn't muster the courage to dispose of the bags from her car, despite finding a suitable spot. In her testimony, Roxana expressed her internal conflict. "It's strange. I had the bravery to commit this heinous crime and dismember a human body as if it were a piglet, but I couldn't bring myself to dispose of the evidence. I was nervous throughout the drive, feeling constantly watched, fearing that police would stop and search my car at any turn. This fear led to panic, even though I had a backup plan involving my daughter, pretending to rush her to the hospital if stopped. I even thought of how to pinch her to make her cry louder." Unable to discard the remains, Roxana returned home with them, hiding the bags in the garage. She cleaned her car's interior with bleach again and visited Claudio's relatives, claiming that he had stolen a large sum of money and hadn't been home for days. They merely shrugged in response. She then visited her mother and brother. Her mother was extremely worried about Roxana's behavior. She was not eating, had a glassy-eyed look, and repeatedly asked the same questions. The only question she answered promptly was about Claudio's absence, saying he went to buy goods for their store, but had a flat tire and got delayed. Returning home and alone with her thoughts and the hidden evidence, Roxana broke down. She called her brother for help. When he arrived, she confessed everything and showed him the containers. Naturally, her brother was in shock. When Roxana called her brother, she wanted to vent and share the nightmarish years she endured with Claudio, but above all, she needed his help to get rid of the containers holding the body. However, her brother refused, fearing police involvement and the possibility of being charged as an accomplice. He urged her to confess to the Carabineros, Chilean police, insisting he would do it if she didn't. Disappointed but realizing she had no other choice, Roxana complied. That night, Roxana went to the 4th police station and announced her intention to make an important statement. The officers, familiar with her, initially thought she wanted to report her troublesome husband. However, they were shocked by her confession. Roxana was immediately arrested. The news spread rapidly throughout the area, attracting countless journalists around the station. They waited eagerly to photograph Roxana as she was led out, hoping to capture a few images and, if lucky, ask her and the officers some questions. As the journalists waited, Roxana was eventually brought out. Handcuffed and in distress, she exclaimed, "I was afraid he would kill me one day," before being escorted into a police car. The case seemed straightforward. Roxana had confessed, provided evidence, and voluntarily surrendered. However, prosecutor Monica Ballesteros wanted a deeper investigation. Skeptical of Roxana's easy confession, she requested an extended arrest to conduct a forensic examination. Ballesteros aimed to prove that Claudio was still alive during the dismemberment, which would significantly increase Roxana's sentence. The judge granted a 60-day detention for further investigation. Meanwhile, Roxana's attorney, Haralima Gutierrez, argued that Roxana acted under extreme emotional distress, possibly exacerbated by postpartum depression and chronic domestic abuse. She emphasized Roxana's cooperation and voluntary confession as mitigating factors. However, the prosecution's theory that Claudio was alive during dismemberment crumbled after forensic results. It was confirmed that Claudio died from the gunshot wound to the chest. The bullet from the .38 caliber revolver caused a heart rupture and damaged vital organs, disproving the prosecution's initial hypothesis. Given these developments, the aggravating circumstances were dismissed. Another lawyer, Juan Pablo Cardenas, who sought to make a name for himself in this high-profile case, pointed out that the firearm used in the murder was legally registered. He also noted that Roxana's first report of domestic violence to the police was filed just 20 days after the couple started living together. Psychologist Rodrigo Valenzuela, after a medical examination, submitted documents to the court indicating that Roxana was extremely mentally unstable at the time of the crime. This meant she wasn't fully aware of her actions, and her emotional instability was linked to the loss of 2 children, one in August 2012 and another just 3 weeks before the crime. Furthermore, a forensic examination requested by the prosecutor revealed that Claudio had a high blood alcohol level of 3 grams per liter at the time of his death. On April 17, 2015, after a year of various examinations, investigations, and evidence gathering, Roxana's trial began. The media, often sensationalizing tragedies, dubbed the case the Molina Cooks case, alluding to Roxana's dismemberment and boiling of her former husband. Some unscrupulous journalists seeking to attract attention to their publications even fabricated stories that Roxana had eaten part of the remains, although this was merely a product of their imagination. Roxana, aware of the media portrayal and deeply distressed by it, refused to make any statements during the trial. The prosecutors tried to influence the judge by emphasizing that Roxana committed a grave crime by Chilean standards, patricide. However, they couldn't prove that the murder was premeditated. The defense attorney, in turn, argued that his client acted in self-defense, protecting herself from a brute who had brutally mistreated her for years. The court hearing lasted several weeks, and during this time, the entire population of Chile followed the case closely. Prosecutor Monica requested a 15-year prison sentence for the accused. However, the judges, having carefully listened to the defense and the jury's opinion, sentenced Roxana to 6 years in a correctional facility with a lenient regime. Claudio's relatives, who understandably wished for a life sentence or even execution for Roxana, and were already protesting when they heard the prosecutor asking for only 15 years, were utterly dismayed by the actual court decision. They tried to deny any violence in the family, and argued that Claudio, being a businessman and financially independent, could not have stolen $6,000 from Roxana. They also claimed that Claudio had confessed to them that Roxana often took out the revolver from the closet and told her husband that she would kill him one day. Claudio's sister, in an interview with the press, even tried to blame Chile as a state, arguing that it's a country where there is no justice, and the judicial system is utterly corrupt, given that such brutal criminals are given such short sentences, comparable to minor robberies. Even Giselle, Claudio's first wife, defended her ex-husband, assuring everyone that there couldn't have been any violence from Claudio's side. She had lived with him for many years, and during all that time, he never dared to lay a finger on her. Meanwhile, Roxana often caused disputes, motivated by her jealousy and possessiveness. Regarding Roxana's subsequent imprisonment, she spent only 2/3 of her sentence in the colony before being transferred to a semi-open education center in Talca for good behavior. Roxana was allowed to communicate with her daughter and was eventually released early. The press, of course, stirred up public interest in this case again, and the public was extremely outraged that the cook from Molina was released early. However, there were also those who, although considering Roxana a murderer, still justified her actions, seeing her as a victim in the whole situation. The debate over this case continues in the country to this day. Overall, this story highlights the grave consequences that can result if domestic violence is not addressed at early stages. No one knows what awaits him or her behind the next turn of fate. We naively plan our lives, dreaming that we will enter a prestigious university, and after graduation, we will get a high-paying job. Later, we will meet a worthy life partner, create a strong family with him, provide our children with a better future, and die in a deep old age in the circle of relatives and friends. This is probably everyone's dream. The success of some only spurs us on, gives us an incentive to live better. But what if things go differently than we expected? As we grow up, we take off our rose-colored glasses, and the clod of adult problems grows every year. It is only how we deal with it that shapes us as a person. From Angela Stalt's memoir on her website, I was born in Bangkok, Thailand, into a military family. My parents raised me with love and respect. I was disciplined but never abused by them. The woman was born in 1972. At the time of the events, she was just over 40 years old. Due to her father's work, the family often had to move around without staying in one place for long periods of time. As soon as the girl got used to the new school and had time to make friends, another move was planned. Angela lived in constant worry and anxiety. The woman's poor health also contributed to her hardships. Angela had been diagnosed with a thyroid disease, for which she had to take maintenance medication for the rest of her life. The disease depressed her mental and emotional state. However, Angela wanted to live and love like all other people. Gradually, her family settled in Georgia. Angela went to high school, where she still had difficulty adjusting. To fit in, she began to socialize with the first company that accepted her. Unfortunately, they were kids from dysfunctional families. There, she met a guy who was 3 years older than Angela and was already in his first year of college. After a year of studying, Angela made the decision to drop out of school and live with a young man. When I was 15 years old and living in Georgia, I married a very abusive man who kept me away from my parents. In addition to being treated like a prisoner, I was regularly punched and choked. Twice, as I recall, he used CPR to bring me to consciousness after choking me. I had broken ribs, a dislocated jaw, numerous bruises. My voice box was damaged and my windpipe was crushed. After 5 years of torment, I found a way to escape from him. At that time, I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorder, and depression. I started taking antidepressants. After the breakup, Angela married a second time fairly quickly. Once again, she found herself trapped with another dominant man. At that point, she was in her early 20s. In 1996, a son was born to the couple, and all would have been nothing, except that the man was not known for his mild temper and also beat the young woman. This exacerbated my symptoms of PTSD, anxiety disorder, and depression. At this time, I started taking a highly addictive drug, Angela recalls. The former lovers eventually broke up and the baby's father disappeared. Angela was left alone with the baby in her arms. Since she never finished school, Angela had few jobs and no profession, and having a baby in her arms made it difficult to find a job. All she could think of in this situation was to find a man to take responsibility for both of them. Around the age of 25, she remarried. From her third marriage, 2 more children were born, a boy and a girl. Despite her health condition and unstable psyche, the woman cherished her family and brought up her children. However, time was ruthless, and for this marriage. In 2011, the man left the family. Later, Angela also claimed that her former spouse was no different from the previous ones. He was a manipulator and a toxic man. According to her, this is what caused the breakup. Now Angela was left alone with 3 children. One thing was good. The older children could already provide for themselves, but Angela had no other stable income except for social payments from the state. She had enough for a modest life, but she wanted to live better. Money decides everything. Probably everyone has heard this expression many times. They are an indicator of prosperity and wealth of a person. They serve as a kind of criterion of his mental abilities, luck, and judgment. However, not everyone knows how to earn them. Some are simply not given. Someone prefers to sit and do nothing while waiting for receipts from outside. Someone does something, even trying, but gets a little, and maybe wrongly disposing of them. There is another category of people who love money and wait for it, the so-called lovers of easy money. But sooner or later there comes a moment when you have to pay the bills. In 2007, Angela and her family moved to Florida, a suburb of Daytona Beach, and settled near a young couple with children. They turned out to be James Schaefer and Candy Medina. The families quickly became friends with each other. The young people supported Angela in difficult times and often visited each other. On April 2nd, 2013, James said goodbye to Candy as he was going to his next appointment. She was sleeping sweetly in her bed with her children. That night, Candy saw her lover for the last time. Missing persons flyers described James as being about 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighing about 275 pounds. He had brown eyes, brown hair. Distinguishing features included several tattoos, one that read Gringo on his neck, a Metallica skull on his right calf, and NCC on his right forearm. The last time he was seen, he was wearing work clothes that consisted of a black shirt, black pants, and black shoes, the standard dress code for a limousine driver. James Schaefer was born in 1976 and grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, USA. He had a fairly large and close-knit family. He grew up together with his brother and sister, whose names were Christian and Andrew. The guy was fond of sports since childhood, highlighting baseball the most. After graduating from high school, together with his girlfriend Candy went in search of a better life in Florida. The couple was in a relationship for a long time, had 4 children. There was a relaxed atmosphere in the family. Each member of the family was loved. The main financial burden fell on the head of the family, James. Therefore, the guy got a job that brought a good income. The local company was engaged in the service of festive events, as well as private transportation of wealthy clients. The firm provided limousines and other expensive cars for rent. James got along with his colleagues, was polite and tactful with customers, and in good standing with the management. Time passed. It would seem that having a decent income, the financial well-being of the family should only grow, but instead, for several months in a row, the couple owed rent on the house. They even had their water turned off. The landlords were threatening to evict James and Candy soon. This kept James on his toes, looking for ways to stay off the streets. He had to do something about it. On that unfortunate night, James left his home to take a company-provided automobile. The man was to drive a group of people from Kissimmee, Florida, to Tampa, and then back. The drive was to take no more than 2 hours. James arrived at work around 3 a.m., picked up the vehicle, and left to complete the assignment, but never returned home. Candy became worried as a lot of time had passed and James never made contact. Later, strange messages started coming from him saying that he needed to disappear for a period of time. The poor woman didn't understand anything. Candy began calling family and friends in the hope of finding out where James was and what had happened to him. And on April 4th, the father of the missing man decided to contact the police to report his son's disappearance. On April 21st, 2013, the sheriff's office received a call from a woman who said she knew someone who might be involved in James's death. She claimed that James Schaefer was not missing or a runaway. He was murdered. The witness blamed it on her own sister. The woman said her relative had attacked the man and now she was going to kill him. Allegedly, at a family meeting, her sister confessed to everyone about killing her best friend under the influence of illegal substances. The caller was then forced to contact the police as she was worried about her demented sister's children. After James's father reported James to the police, the detectives immediately began their investigation. First, they decided to talk to Candy. Perhaps she knew something about her loved one's disappearance or had been causing wariness lately. Candy reported that her husband had gone to work, and nothing in his behavior seemed suspicious to her, except perhaps the messages that came from James and messengers after his disappearance. It later turned out that several other people in the family's inner circle had received similar texts. This information required investigation. The management of the company where James worked explained that the worker was indeed listed as one of the best employees, and such a sudden disappearance was not like him. They helped detectives clarify the time and reconstruct some of the events of that day. James arrived at work to pick up his car, got it ready to leave, and left around 4 a.m. However, the police still managed to find out something interesting. Employees of the firm said that shortly before his disappearance, James complained about financial problems and asked to borrow money. It is quite possible that this could be the reason for his disappearance. The man could have left the city to disappear from unfulfilled obligations and creditors. It was established that James had a gambling addiction. This explained his financial problems and utility and rent arrears. Detectives took this fact as a primary basis, so they continued to contact family relatives and friends. That's how police officers found themselves on the doorstep of James and Candy's friend and neighbor, Angela Stalt. Angela greeted the police officers calmly, telling them that she was saddened by the disappearance of James, who was indeed her friend. He often stopped by her place after his shift for a drink, a heart-to-heart chat, and to relax. They had purely platonic feelings for each other. When Angela was having financial problems, she approached James asking for help, to which he offered to let her do his personal bookkeeping. When asked why his wife wasn't doing it, Angela replied that there was nothing strange about it. Thus, they helped each other. She would get a small reward for the work she did, and he would get his affairs in order. Initially, everything was fine, but at one point he started having financial problems. He wanted to get social support from the state. That's why he decided to involve Angela. So their friendly relationship turned into a dependent relationship on each other. After communicating with Angela, the police officers could not get away from the idea that there was something suspicious about Angela having access to James's accounts. Several transactions that had been made after the man's disappearance raised questions, and their meetings in the mornings after work raised some doubts about the fidelity of the missing man. So the police decided to take a closer look at the family friend. Angela seemed sincere, relaxed. There was no particular reason not to believe her after all. People often ask someone close to them to do the bookkeeping or hire specialists, so Stalt was ruled out as a suspect. Once established, it seemed obvious that James's flight was due to financial problems or something similar. There was money involved in the case. Investigators went to Angela's house again, but this time they decided to do more than just talk outside the house. They also asked to see her home. But what appeared before their eyes threw the representatives of law enforcement agencies into confusion. All the rooms were littered with garbage. Dirty plates with leftovers were everywhere. The leftovers were spoiled, and it all stank. In short, it was unsanitary. It was clear that Angela had some kind of mental problems. However, they did not find James here. This is how Angela tells it. Because of my illness and injuries, I have not been able to properly clean or maintain my house for a long time. The police asked Angela to take part in the formal interrogation, which would be audio recorded. She repeated everything she had said earlier. She also said that her buddy was not addicted to substances, but was an occasional user, with some prescription drugs involved. For James, she said, it was an opportunity to relax on the weekends. Angela also said that the last time she saw the man was after he was reported missing. He came to her home and asked for money, to which she replied that she would not give him $1. The response angered the man, however, he left her home. The police also asked Angela to make a call to James, to explain the situation with the bills, to inform him that there is a big overspend, and that it could turn into something bad, to which she refused, citing the fact that he was no longer in contact with her. Angela also told about the problems at James' work, that someone from the staff threatened him, asking him to return a debt, so the detective's interest shifted to James's co-workers and his boss. A sudden call on April 21, 2013, made adjustments to the investigation of the case. The information could not be ignored. Once again, the detectives went to Angela Stalt. except that there was no trace left of the calm and balanced woman. They were met on the doorstep by a woman who clearly hadn't looked after herself in days. Her hair was sloppy, she seemed to be out of sorts. Her behavior was also inadequate, which was the reason she was deemed dangerous, both to herself and to society. On this basis, Angela was taken into custody, and later she was sent to a psychiatric hospital for 72 hours for the necessary evaluation. Before she was placed in the hospital, she spent some time under arrest at the local police department. So it was established that on April 3, 2013, she picked up James Schaefer from work after completing an order. James was alarmed. He needed to fix the situation or his family would be evicted from the house. Either he and his children would be left on the street, or they would have to move back in with their parents, which wasn't an option either. In addition, he did not want to admit to himself and his family that his difficult financial situation was caused by gambling. He was so eager to win back what he had lost. But luck had turned away from James, and there was no one else to turn to at work. It was embarrassing in front of his co-workers. He'd always repaid his debts before, but now things were going wrong. Maybe Angela will help out, and if not, I'll ask her father to help. He helped me out once before and I paid him back all my debts on time, James pondered. Angela suggested they come in and have a glass of a mixture of peach schnapps and vodka. And for more peace of mind, let's add something else. It'll help you relax, Angela suggested. James was fine with the drug, which, by the way, was only available by prescription. He even crushed the pills himself so that they would dissolve faster and enhance the effect of the alcohol. After drinking a glass, James asked his friend if her father could lend him an amount between $2,000 and $4,000. James knew that his friend's father was seriously ill and literally on the verge of death. Therefore, he himself needed money for treatment, but his situation was desperate. How can he ask such a thing, especially now? He already owes me money. I can barely make ends meet. Angela was indignant, but she didn't let on. You'll have to ask your father about that, Angela replied. James then offered to give her a ride to her parents' house so that she wouldn't have to stall and find out as soon as possible. Hope for a speedy resolution to the trouble settled in his heart. Around 5 a.m. they set out on the road. Since it was still early, Angela's father was asleep, and the woman had changed her mind about going to him. She suggested stopping the car near the cemetery located in Dayton. No one expected what happened afterward. At least that's what Angela told the police. I took James to my favorite place in Dayton, which turned out to be the cemetery, to talk to him alone. I knew he would scream, and I didn't want my kids to be abused anymore. They were being terrorized by their father, and they didn't need any more of that. So when we parked, we turned around in our seats facing each other with our backs against the doors, Angela recalled. She told James that she would not borrow money for him from her father, much less force him to take out loans for that purpose, and that she would stop doing his bookkeeping after they sorted out the bills and Social Security payments. Moll. Enough of him setting her up. Jason became enraged, started screaming and grabbed her by the throat. He screamed, "I'm going to kill you! You can't do that! It's my money!" I grabbed my cell phone that was on the console. He threw it into the back seat of my car, continuing his tirade. Angela describes his condition. According to her, he threatened that he would kill her children as well. Stalt took these threats seriously. To defend herself, she grabbed the first thing she could get her hands on from the trunk. That tool turned out to be an ice axe, which she carried with her as camping and hiking equipment. Angela struck James and hit him in the eye, but he wasn't dead. He was completely disoriented. James began to scream. Angela then took a PVC cord that she used on hikes to climb trees. Wrapping the cord around her roommate's throat, she rested her feet on the back of the driver's seat and began pulling hard on his neck. After a while, the man stopped moving. Angela pulled the ice pick out of the victim's right eye. When asked by the police about where in the car such equipment came from, the neighbor explained that she and her family were going to go camping in the next month. All these gadgets were necessary for her, and she was just storing them in the car. Everyone at Angela's interrogation was horrified. In fact, James hadn't asked for anything supernatural. She could have refused him and stopped communicating with him further. Moreover, they believed that there might not have been any threats from James at all, and that Angela's mental state had played a cruel joke on her. A medical examination later showed that Angela was aware of her own actions during the incident. The police also did not rule out that the crime could have been planned in advance. Firstly, the strange accessories in the car were questionable. Secondly, why leave the house to just talk when it could have been done in front of witnesses? To which Angela also had an answer. I knew he had some violent tendencies in the past, but he had never been violent towards me before. If I thought he was going to use physical force, I wouldn't have taken him to a place where I was in danger. I would have taken him to some public place. He almost killed me. Things could have easily gone differently, and I wouldn't have put myself in that situation. When it was over, Angela was very frightened. According to her, she was in shock, but that didn't stop her from stabbing the other eye again to make sure James was dead. But the gruesome story didn't end there. To avoid getting blood splattered on her car, she wrapped the dead man in a plastic bag. When he finally let go of me, I realized he was dead, got out of the car, and I threw up. It took quite a while before I could breathe, and then I was faced with a new kind of horror. I was on autopilot, my mind strangely shut down, and I just started doing something. I went back to the car to get my cell phone to call the police, but I couldn't find it. So I covered it up as best I could and drove to the police station. As I drove down Fort Smith Boulevard, I panicked, the thoughts going through my head telling me that the police would never believe me. My life was over. I would lose my children. I kept looking at him and the fear kept building. Anyway, with James' corpse, Angela arrived home. After that, she dragged the body to the shed. Here, taking a hacksaw, she began to cut it into pieces. The severed body fragments, Angela decided to put them into pots and pans, oiling them. A remarkable fact is that when Angela first spoke to the police about James's disappearance, his body parts were just being boiled in pots and pans. However, this went unnoticed as the investigators did not enter the house that time. When police first entered Angela's home, Stalt had already completely dismembered the body. She packed the individual parts into garbage bags and scattered them in different parts of the city. Some sources say that she was assisted in this by her older children, whom she told that she had accidentally hit a deer on the road. At the same time, she strictly forbade them to enter the shed so that they would not see the evidence of the crime. Following this confession, Angela was arrested for second-degree murder. Police officers actively searched for James's posture. Out of 206 bones, they were only able to locate 56. James Schaefer was buried in a closed casket. None of his relatives could bid him a proper farewell. Afterwards, the prosecutor's office upgraded the crime to first-degree murder because many facts pointed to a premeditated act. In addition, Angela tried to get rid of the body, covering her tracks, which wanted to confuse the investigation. Investigators believed that the woman's plan was well thought out and also included misinformation of James's relatives. For this purpose, she used his cell phone, from which she wrote to his wife and family, as well as some friends. On December 2nd, 2014, Angela Stalt went on trial. The woman immediately confessed to the murder, but insisted that she did it as a result of self-defense. The prosecutor's office tried to refute her words, as the main motive was considered to be money. Angela had been in financial trouble for most of her life, making her fearful that James would cheat and use her. That morning, when they had been drinking with James, the woman had clearly had too much to drink. Her anger at him, at life, and at the injustice of the men around her spilled out into an assault. On December 5th, 2014, the jury retired to deliberate on the verdict. After deliberating, they unanimously found Angela guilty of first-degree murder, as well as abuse of the body, tampering with evidence. As a result, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. What was going on in Angela's head is hard to imagine. A sick mind, a sick body, a tortured soul. However, apparently Angela still doesn't realize what she has done. She didn't just take the life of a man she considered her best friend. She brutalized him without giving him a single chance for salvation. And after all, like a butcher butchering a carcass, she dismembered James and boiled him in a pot. Money had ruined more than one friendship, but to do it this way, you'd better stay away from friends like that.
The price of love. What determines our future? Definitely the decisions we make and the actions we take. However, sometimes chance intervenes in the usual way of life, and then they say that you can't escape fate. Also happened to the heroes of today's story, Joseph and Olga Connell, whose life paths crossed in an unexpected way, after which the couple never parted. Unfortunately, the lovers could not enjoy each other to the fullest, as they were destined for a terrible fate. Around 2 a.m. on September 23, 2013, a series of gunshots rang out near the Paladin Club condominium in Wilmington, Delaware. When eyewitnesses ran to the scene, they saw a man and a woman lying on the ground. A little later, a call went out to emergency services. The caller reported the attack and its victims. Medics arrived and administered first aid. Despite the gunshot wounds to the face and loss of blood, the victim was alive, which could not be said about her companion. The bullet-riddled man showed no signs of life. Apparently, he was killed instantly, shot in the back of the head. Unfortunately, time was running against him. Realizing this, police officers questioned the woman about what had happened. In response, she uttered something inaudible and lost consciousness. The victim was rushed to the hospital. However, halfway there, she gave up her last attempts to fight for life and died. Working at the scene, specialists found personal belongings and documents. Connell's newlyweds turned out to be the deceased. All valuables, wallet, purse, cell phones, and even the diamond ring on Olga's hand were not stolen, which means that the attack was not an attempted robbery, but a targeted murder. It was later determined that the victims were attacked outside their home. After the young men returned home from celebrating their spouse's 39th birthday, the attackers acted in a treacherous manner and fired approximately 25 shots into their backs. Detectives had to figure out what interrupted the couple's love affair, and whether the motive for the crime could have been a long-running domestic dispute. Connell family. Joseph was born into a successful and close-knit family. He was the middle child and had an older brother, John, and a younger sister, Kelly. During the younger years, the children often quarreled over nothing, but when their parents divorced, they rallied and became inseparable. After the breakup of relations, the guys stayed to live with their mother. After a while, another man appeared in the life of a woman. The new marriage turned out to be successful in all plans. The family still did not need anything, and the stepfather replaced the father. The family lived in a fairly quiet and cozy neighborhood. During the day, everyone went about their business, and in the evenings, everyone gathered around the round table and discussed personal events. Joe grew up a correct and persistent boy. However, these qualities were more about school and work. Otherwise, he was a fun-loving boy and the soul of the company. Even from an early age, the young man dreamed of starting his own business and to establish himself as a businessman. Thanks to his business acumen and resourcefulness, his efforts bore fruit. Together with his best friend, Christopher Rivers, the hero of the story became the owner of a machine store and a specialized store in Tullyville. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the young men as successful partners who had risen from scratch. The buddies were very friendly, moreover, burned a common idea, and developed their business. The story of acquaintance. Joseph was a convinced bachelor until he met a Russian beauty, Olga. Communication between the young people began on the dating site. They quickly found common topics for conversation, as they were already quite mature people with a lot of life experience. A female friend admitted online that she was in the process of divorce and had only recently moved to the United States. The man told about his experienced relationships and plans for the future. Both interlocutors were sociable and bright personalities, had similar interests and views on life. Therefore, it is not surprising that gradually their feelings grew into something more. One day, Joe realized that he no longer imagines his life without his beloved and made her an offer. Olga reciprocated. The only nuance was the fact that the bride has not yet been presented to the family. However, the man did not fear for this. He was confident in his choice and in the reaction of relatives. The beauty and character of the chosen one charmed his relatives. They were in shock that there was a woman who managed to melt the heart of a hot, loving relative. Relationships of the couple developed rapidly. Joe took Olga everywhere with him, proud of her appearance and charisma, therefore without shyness did not hide his love. However, over time it became clear that behind the female malleability and tenderness hides a real Siberian temperament where the beloved was born. Her irrepressible energy and entrepreneurial spirit amazed everyone. She seemed to be able to do anything. Connell was so delighted and in love that he decided not to postpone the wedding in a long time. Perhaps he was in such a hurry to get married, unwittingly anticipating the coming events. Such people are usually said, in a hurry to live. Surely each of you have encountered such examples in your environment. Investigation. After the attack, the police interviewed the crowd, bystanders and neighbors of the victims. Perhaps among them were those who could clarify something. Unfortunately, none of them had seen what had happened. However, many people heard gunshots which caused them to run away. There were even those who claimed to have heard loud male voices shortly before the shooting. They seemed to be arguing with the newlyweds about something. Violent crime ensued. Not far from the scene of the crime, forensic experts found a large number of fired casings that belonged to two different types of weapons. Thus, it became clear that there were several attackers. The sheer number of gunshots indicated that the couple was initially given a death sentence. It is unlikely that anyone would have managed to stay alive in such a shootout. To carry out their plan, the criminals waited for the young people to return from the party. The birthday party took place in one of the popular bars. Friends and some members of the Connell family came to the party. Everyone had fun and danced until midnight, and when they were tired, they went home. The couple parked their car at the house and headed toward the front entrance. It was at this point that the intruders found the most opportune time to carry out their criminal scheme. The next step in the investigation was to interview the family members of the victims. Officers spoke to Joseph's parents. They asked about the couple's alleged enemies and detractors. But the man's mother and stepfather replied that they knew nothing about it. At first glance, the newlyweds had no foes. On the other hand, there is hardly anyone who does not have envious people. In any case, none of the newly wedded spouses told it. At the same time, the detectives heard some curious information. It turns out that Joe and his sister Kelly had a spat on the eve of the wedding. It concerned an expensive family ring encrusted with diamonds. According to experts, its value was about $20,000. After the quarrel, relations between the relatives were not the same. However, all relatives claimed that Kelly would never have gone to the crime. Especially, it turned out that after the attack, the ring remained on Olga's finger. Nevertheless, the version about the hidden offense had to be checked. By a strange coincidence, on the unfortunate night, Kelly was one of the first on the scene of the crime. Despite the fact that the woman lived in another neighborhood, that time she was nearby. The ring story. The lovers planned to get married in the Virgin Islands. The only thing that marred the wedding preparations was the engagement ring. According to family tradition, the mother passed the family jewel to her son. However, the jewelry had already been given to the youngest daughter for the wedding, which took place 10 years ago. In order not to change the established custom, Joe discreetly took the ring from his sister and replaced the precious stones with zirconium. After that, he secretly returned the ring to the mistress and diamonds inserted into the setting of Olga's engagement jewelry. The deed of the protagonist is difficult to explain, especially given his financial situation. Perhaps in this way, he decided not to violate the established rules. It was assumed that none of the women should not have guessed it. However, things had not gone as calculated. Kelly noticed the switch and began looking for the culprit. When the younger sister learned of her brother's action, she was extremely outraged. Understandably, she expressed her indignation to Joseph. However, the latter was very upset, as he thought that the sister was angry for nothing and just wanted to violate family traditions and ruin the wedding. One way or another, but the ceremony took place. Kelly did not attend the event, citing employment. At the same time, in retaliation, the woman decided to mar the celebration and sent a sarcastic message to Olga, so the unsuspecting bride learned the truth. After that, the relationship between brother and sister became strained. Periodically between them there were altercations, often sounded mutual reproaches and insults, and the event that occurred afterward and completely knocked everyone out of the rut: a mysterious robbery. Joint life at the newlyweds began there in the Virgin Islands. During the honeymoon, the couple enjoyed marriage. Olga and Joseph sunbathed on the beach, swam in the sea, fished, rode on a yacht, and tried exotic cuisine. There was plenty of money for these purposes. Joe was proud that the business was booming and bringing in a tangible income, about $1 million a year. Back home, the newlyweds bought an expensive Mercedes car. The new convertible cost them $100,000. Since Olga did not belong to those women who are happy to sit on the neck of her husband, she began to help her husband. Olga was well-educated and well-read, well-versed in English, and also had an unprecedented charm. In addition, the past experience of working on the stock exchange came in handy. Therefore, she easily entered the business and engaged in administration. As soon as the lovely blonde took up the business, Joe and Chris had a lot more clients. A week before the attack near the condominium, someone broke into the home of a young family. While the couple were busy doing business, an unknown person stole jewelry and family heirlooms. The diamond ring was Olga's that day. After the Connell couple returned home, the head of the family noticed the illegal intrusion and called the police. Law enforcement officers examined the scene and surprisingly did not find any evidence. The search for the burglar yielded no solid results. Detectives put forward a version that the robbery was the result of someone staging or the work of a professional. That's why Kelly was under a lot of suspicion. As many believed, the sister had every reason to stage the crime. Perhaps over time, she could not forgive her brother for what he had done and decided to teach him a lesson. However, soon the investigation of the case came to a dead end. A more terrible crime happened to the spouses, and all the attention of detectives shifted to the investigation of a double crime. Search for motive. When detectives interviewed Kelly, she looked grief-stricken. The woman cooperated with the investigation and didn't hide anything. She told about the conflict with Joe and even showed correspondence about it. In one of the messages, Olga expressed the opinion that the recent robbery was organized by Kelly herself. However, Kelly denied it. But the investigation could not exclude her from the number of suspects, and, as the woman later admitted, exerted powerful pressure in some places. Despite the obvious motive, all the facts were to the contrary. At none of the interrogations did the victim's younger sister change her testimony, nor was she confused. During Joe and Olga's funeral, the sister looked broken. It was obvious that she loved her brother and was grieving the loss. At the same time, other versions of the murder were being considered. Joseph Connell belonged to the number of enviable grooms, and his wife was a rare beauty. Therefore, jealousy was not ruled out as a motive for the crime. Perhaps not everyone around the couple shared their happiness, and some of the former young people could hold a grudge, and after their marriage, to take revenge in life. However, the suspicions of detectives were not confirmed. During the investigation, it was found that Joe parted with his former companions on a good note. Moreover, they have long married and are happily married. This applies to Olga's past relationships as well. She divorced her Russian husband and cut off all contacts. However, an offended man would hardly take any measures to settle accounts with his ex-wife, and even more so, to travel a great distance across the ocean to do so. In this regard, this theory has been ruled out. Nevertheless, the search for enemies of newlyweds continued. At the same time, the investigators did not give rest to the subject of discord between brother and sister. Greed is a common reason for committing a crime. Therefore, after questioning Kelly, the investigation focused on Garrett Catalano, her husband. The man loved his wife very much and would do anything for her. It is likely that at the request of his beloved, he could have gone for a double crime. During the conversation, the potential suspect behaved calmly and convincingly. It turns out that he had a reliable alibi and also confirmed the innocence of his wife. However, Garrett expressed doubts that his brother-in-law made a multi-million-dollar fortune by honest labor. Catalano opaquely hinted that Joe may have been dealing in illegal substances. Over time, his words took hold. There were others who claimed that Joe was secretly selling steroids and making mad money from it. Secret witnesses identified another man we know as one of his associates. Thus, the detectives came upon a longtime friend and business partner, Christopher Rivers, best friend. Chris, unlike everyone around him, didn't seem to be worried about what had happened. He continued to lead his usual life. It was understandable that he had the double responsibility for the business. Meetings with suppliers, work with clients made him hold on, but still, his irrepressible vigor and strength of mind led to strange thoughts. One day, the investigators decided to talk to the man. He said that on the ill-fated night he was supposed to be present at the celebration, but could not show up because he was busy at work. Despite a long friendship and the premature death of his partner, Christopher unexpectedly spoke out unflatteringly. He said that Joseph had changed recently and was apparently unscrupulous. Rivers did not avoid Olga. Allegedly, he heard that the wife of Joe was not as simple as she wanted to seem and came to the U.S. to represent the interests of the Russian mafia. And a successful marriage only untied her hands. The words of the companion explained the high income of the family, but his suspicions needed careful verification. Perhaps everything the man said was just rumor and speculation, or maybe there was a good reason for it. However, Joseph's connection to the underworld soon became apparent. The information was not a secret and was publicly available. It turns out that a few years before meeting with Olga, her lover was accused of illegal possession of weapons, and even served a decent term for it. During his time in prison, the man managed to acquire new acquaintances. It is not excluded that after serving his sentence, local authorities pulled him into the trade in illegal substances. Perhaps over time, Connell crossed someone's path and they decided to take him out. But could the connections acquired behind bars have been the motive for the attack? The investigation was gathering momentum. While the detectives were working on the shady business, an interesting point came to light. Harry Cook, a well-known drug dealer, said he had heard Rivers make negative remarks about Joe on more than one occasion. Rivers accused his business partner of stealing. Chris Rivers admitted to him that he and his companion were selling illegal medical drugs through an auto parts store. But the buddy is greedy and distributes the profits unequally, while Chris is in greater need of money and has huge debts. And Joseph himself spends all the finances on an idle life. For this reason, Rivers joked that he wouldn't mind if his friend disappeared, and later seriously asked Harry if he wanted to help him in this, to which the latter replied no. Thus, the identity of Rivers appeared in a different light. In this regard, the investigation repeatedly questioned Chris. However, he had an alibi. At the time of the murder, the man was at home, which was confirmed by external and internal video surveillance cameras. At the same time, specialists decided to check his censures and studied the accounting documents of the firm. It turned out that, despite the large revenue, the business did suffer losses. However, as it turned out, numerous embezzlements have nothing to do with Connell. It was the stipulator himself who was responsible. Police informants reported that Chris has been using heavy substances for a long time, and lately his addiction has gotten out of control. This explains the numerous debts and shoplifting. Against this background, the man developed paranoia. That's why he repeatedly confessed to acquaintances that they want to kill him. In addition, it became known that he was personally involved in the sale of steroids, and Joe blindly believed his comrade and was in the dark about what was happening in front of his nose. In addition, Joe's attention turned to the new relationship. This information became known thanks to the information of a mysterious informant, a sick mind. Detectives came upon the man after examining Rivers' phone records. He was known to make a lot of phone calls on the night of September 23rd. Despite being at home at the time of the crime, his phone did not go silent. All calls were subsequently cleared from the device, but experts had no trouble reconstructing the story. Most of the calls belonged to Joshua, a former FBI informant. When police contacted Joshua, he admitted that he often used Rivers' services. One day, Chris Rivers made him a tempting offer, $65,000 for his companion's head. The big money undoubtedly attracted the man. However, Joshua did not want to participate in the case directly and found other hitmen. To this end, he turned to Dominic Benson and Aaron Thompson. Mercenaries cost him $5,000, which he received from the customer as an advance payment. Eventually, the confusing crime picture came to light. The best friend had sentenced his buddy and his spouse to a sad end. Was the motive behind the crime a grudge and a desire for sole ownership of a shared business? No, it was the $1 million that one of the partners was entitled to as an insurance payout. It turned out that long before the appearance of Olga, the former partners had secured the business and insured their lives. In the event of the death of one of them, the other received the amount to pay off the mortgage on the machine shop. If Joe died, the amount received would be enough to pay off all of Chris's debts. But here's the problem. His partner got married, and all payments were due to the legal spouse. So Rivers decided to take out two of them at once. The conversation that took place between the organizer and his accomplice on the night of the crime indirectly confirmed this. Although the communications between the men were encrypted, it was obvious that Rivers was concerned about the success of the operation. To better analyze the communication between the two men, detectives seized phones from the four suspects. Thanks to the mobile devices, their movements on the night of the crime were recorded. Dominic and Aaron were at that moment near the house of the young couple Connell. Curiously, the video footage that confirmed Chris's alibi played against him. The cameras show that the man is nervous and does not let the phone out of his hands. After detectives reached out to Joshua, he didn't put up a fight and surrendered to authorities. To mitigate his punishment, during the interrogation, the man agreed to a deal with the investigation and testified against the customer. Thus, Christopher came up with a cunning plan. He wanted to use the quarrel between his brother and sister to frame Kelly. During the investigation, it was proved that the robbery at the Connell house was the next stage of the criminal plot. Following Christopher's instructions, Joshua broke into the couple's home and burglarized it. However, the head of the target was a controversial family heirloom, a diamond ring. Coincidentally, Olga was wearing it that day. If the plan had succeeded, the investigation would have followed a false trail and blamed everything on Joe's sister. But this was not enough for Rivers, and after the crime, he tried to blacken the name of his friend. As it turned out later, the death of Joe and his lover was the result of a cold-blooded and carefully planned crime for money, justice. In 2014, Chris Rivers was indicted on several charges. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, as well as conspiracy in the first degree and solicitation of a felony in the first degree. His co-defendants were also tried. The trials took place separately but parallel to each other. During the trial, it was proven that Aaron Thompson was the one who held the weapon. He was therefore found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and first-degree conspiracy. The felon received 2 life sentences and plus 45 years. His buddy Dominic Benson was acquitted on the felony charge because he changed his mind about shooting at the last minute. Therefore, for first-degree conspiracy and aiding and abetting criminals, he received only 5 years in prison. Thanks to his active cooperation with the police for the murder conspiracy, Joshua got the same sentence. As for the main instigator of the crime, Chris Rivers, he was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 50 years. "We can forgive another person anything but success," goes the famous saying. Despite his young age, Joseph was a remarkable man. He built a business, found the love of his life, except that he was not left with the opportunity to enjoy happiness. Together, the couple could reach new heights, build a strong family, and have heirs. However, the thirst for profit and the dislike of his partner made irreparable adjustments to their measured life. Money, one of the old and common motives for crime. Christopher's pernicious addiction and greed ruined several lives. During his years in prison, the convict will surely be cured of his pernicious addiction to substances. But will he be able to stifle the guilt that is supposed to come with time? Unknown. Or maybe in his case, the voice of conscience will never be heard. After all, not everyone dares to spend the rest of his life in a constant struggle with himself. On January 12, 2023, CBS News Minnesota aired a 24-second clip of the death of gray-haired old man Donald Blom. He died on January 10, 2023, at the age of 73 from natural causes consistent with age. But who was this old man who made it into the news summary? Donald Blom is a brutal maniac and criminal who served a life sentence in prison and despite his deeds died his death. Donald Blom's death brings to an end a long-running saga of violence and depravity that began in the 1970s and saw him commit a series of heinous crimes, culminating in the brutal murder of Kathy Poirier. Despite his long history of violence, Blom managed to evade justice for years until a chance encounter led to his capture and punishment. He began his crime spree in 1975 when he kidnapped a young girl. The pervert gagged her and took advantage of her, then locked her in the trunk of his car, but the girl was not timid, and she managed to escape and later handed over to the police criminal. Blom was tried and found guilty, but the punishment was too lenient, and in 1978, when he was free, he again committed aggravated assault. In 1983, he was arrested for criminal sexual conduct. That same year, he threatened 2 young girls in a remote area with a knife, tied them to a tree and stuffed socks in their mouths. He choked and revived one of them several times and repeated that he was going to do something terrible to them. The girls were rescued when a police patrol saw their improperly parked car and responded quickly to find the owner. Blom then fled into the woods and later changed his appearance by dyeing his hair. He was arrested 2 months later. When one of the girls recognized him, he pleaded guilty to the crime, but the newly received punishment did not reform him. During an examination in 1992, the psychologist concluded that without close supervision and monitoring, Blom would resume antisocial behavior in the near future. Antisocial behaviors are actions that are harmful or disregard the mental state of others, which is exactly the state the psychologist predicted Donald would be in. However, Blom managed to change his name, get a job, and get married. By May 1999, he had 6 felony convictions on his record, 5 of which involved kidnapping and violence. But who is Donald Blom, and where does the cruelty and desire to dominate others come from in an ordinary man? Let's get to the bottom of it, because perhaps the answer lies in the man's rather troubled early years. Donald Alban Blom was born on February 5, 1949, in the state of Minnesota. He was an American by nationality. Blom had a troubled childhood as he was often abused by his father from his early age until his teenage years. By then, Donald Blom was already drinking heavily and exhibiting behavioral problems, and in 10th grade he went to a reform school where he often skipped classes. The trauma of a violent relationship with his father is likely what led him to develop behavioral and alcohol problems. This was especially evident as he entered puberty. But let's take a closer look at this story through the eyes of a mentally healthy person and ponder where the chain of events that led to the man's disappearance broke down. On May 26, 1999, Caitlin Poirier was working the night shift alone at a convenience store at a service station. After midnight, a customer of the store called the police to report that the clerk was gone. Police officers who arrived on the scene found the store was indeed empty. They checked the surveillance video and saw a large man holding Katie by the neck lead her out of the store around 11:40 p.m. He was wearing jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23 on the back. The fragile young woman was apparently forced out of the store. Catherine Honeck, an employee of the Subway restaurant that was next to the store from which the girl disappeared, was questioned by police. She said that shortly before the Subway store closed around 10 p.m., she saw a man acting strangely. After closing, Honeck drove home, and coincidentally, she encountered the man who was leaving the store on the road. She noted that the stranger was driving a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with an extended cab with white markings on the side. The pickup truck looped around the maintenance area several times before entering Moose Lake and stopping in the parking lot of a local cafe. Honeck also reported that Kathy's car was still in the parking lot when she left work. Based on her description and partially recovered surveillance camera footage, a rough sketch of the kidnapper was made. He had long blonde hair, and appeared to be about 25 years old. A composite sketch was made from 4 witness statements and was broadcast on local television and placed in local newspapers asking for information. While clues were being gathered, hundreds of people arrived from across the state to help circle the wooded area around the station in search of the kidnapped Kathy Poirier. Police used service dogs and helicopters, but found nothing. Posters of Kathy appeared in many newspapers and on billboards throughout the region, turning her story into a high-profile missing persons case. The local sex offender facility, which was located near the store where Katie went missing, reported that all inmates were accounted for. The information provided was accurate, which completely ruled out a kidnapping by a fugitive offender. Police officers began searching for the vehicle by license plate number and came up with Donald Blom, but unfortunately, the truck in his driveway was white in color. On June 6, 1999, the official search ended without success, but many volunteers continued to look for the girl. They believed that at least someone somewhere had seen something that would make the right connection and bring the girl home. Whether the perpetrator was brave or foolish for daring to take the girl out of a store equipped with a security camera, investigators were looking for at least one more mistake he would make. The searchers emphasized the neighborhood itself. After all, if the perpetrator was in this fairly remote area at night and returned to the store twice, it was likely that he knew the area very well, which meant that someone must have seen the man before the crime. A search headquarters was set up at the Lutheran Church in Moose Lake, with staff members assisting in processing leads and volunteers handing out flyers describing Katie. On the wall were maps with large crosses marking the areas that searchers had already traversed. But despite the efforts and hopes of many, Katie never turned up, suggesting that the kidnapper might be an athlete or a fan of the New York Yankees team. The police sought the help of a sports figure. 2 weeks passed, but still no result. The police asked Minnesota Twins legend Paul Molitor to make a public service announcement. His appeal to Minnesotans across the state caught the attention of Darrell Brown, who worked at the Minnesota Veterans Home. On June 18th, he called the hotline to report his co-worker Donald Hutchinson, who had recently stopped driving his black pickup truck and was described as looking like a composite sketch. He had been absent the day after the abduction and had recently gotten a haircut. Investigation revealed that Donald Hutchinson was actually Donald Blom and had a black pickup truck carefully hidden in his garage. He also owned property 12 miles from the store in Moose Lake where Kathy worked. During further digging, investigators learned that Blom had been convicted of sex crimes, specifically kidnapping petite young girls like Katie. Detectives worked quickly to get a search warrant. Agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension went looking for Blom and found him and his family at a campground 140 miles outside of Richfield. Agents woke him up early in the morning to ask him some questions. He was brought in for questioning. Further inspection revealed that Blom had purchased property in Moose Lake about 2 years ago. Neighbors confirmed that he had been there frequently before Katie's abduction, but had not been there since. Blom's supervisor at the veterans' home said he was unaware of the man's criminal record because he used the name Hutchinson. He said Blom always kept to himself and didn't socialize much with people. After his arrest, Donald Blom was friendly and cooperative, but then he refused to testify and asked for an attorney. Meanwhile, authorities organized a series of searches that left them in shock. Various items were seized from Blom's home, but no official statement was given as to what the items were or how they figured in the investigation. Another search was conducted on Blom's 20-acre property in Moose Lake, involving more than 100 National Guard members and several hundred volunteers. They marched several miles from his property into the woods, but as darkness fell, they had to leave. The next morning, the search resumed with renewed vigor, and Katie's mother said she had a gut feeling that they would find her daughter alive. Apparently, some hoped the girl was being held somewhere against her will, but the sheriff was less optimistic. On the morning of the second day, Searchers found bone-like fragments among the ashes in a fire pit on Donald Blom's property. They were sent to the lab for further testing, and to everyone's shock, they were identified as bone fragments, and a tooth found in the ashes was also sent to odontologists, experts in dental remains. Certified forensic dentist Dr. Ann Norlander conducted a time-consuming and expensive examination of the tooth. She knew that under the conditions under which it was extracted, any DNA that could have been extracted from the pulp of the tooth would have been destroyed, so she had to resort to other methods. When she came across something that looked like a filling, it confirmed that it was a human tooth and allowed her to determine if it could have belonged to Katie. Dental fillings are made up of an organic matrix and an inorganic filler. The organic matrix burns away, leaving behind particles of the filler. This allows the analyst to identify a brand, or at least a group of brands. Manufacturers use as many as 50 different types of fillers, any one of which will show up vividly on dental x-rays. The composition of the filling of the tooth from Blom's fire pit matched the composition of the fillings used for Katie. In addition, researchers were able to identify it as tooth 18 and determine that it belonged to a young woman. The likelihood that it had once been in Kathy's mouth and not someone else from the area was quite high. One major question remains unanswered. Why did the perpetrator get out of prison after kidnapping 7 different girls? If the justice system had worked better, Katie might still be alive. Instead, Blom was able to change his name and shake off the stain of his criminal past, get a job, get married, and become a new identity as a cover to continue causing harm. In the case of Katie Poirier, Blom was charged with kidnapping and unlawful possession of a firearm, which is a federal charge. Given his prior convictions, Blom was not allowed to carry a firearm. He was offered a plea agreement, but he didn't want to even talk. But then he changed his mind and said he was willing to testify, with the condition that he call home. On September 8th, Blom made a tearful confession that lasted 2.5 hours. He said that on that day, May 26, 1999, he went fishing and then drove home to Richfield. Later that evening, however, he returned to his home on Moose Lake. On the way, he stopped to buy liquor and have a beer at a bar. He saw Kathy in the store while she was doing business. He did not know her, but grabbed her and forcibly put her in his pickup truck. He then drove her to his motorhome. I don't know if it was just out of guilt or something else or because I felt stupid, he said, but then I strangled her and killed her. He strangled her from behind, saying it took about 20 minutes. He did not admit to any other type of assault. Once he knew she was dead, Blom placed her body in a fire pit in the fetal position and then gathered wood and paper to make it burn. But Blom's account clearly contradicted the video camera footage and the discovery in the burn pit. Blom claimed that he remembered her asking him several times to let her go, although she did not struggle with him until he began choking her on his property. He said he managed to kill her with his bare hands. His account of burning the remains was also not realistic enough, as wood and paper alone could not have reached a high enough temperature to turn a human body to ashes. When prodded, he admitted that none of this made much sense to him. He just didn't know why he did it. When the interview was over, Blom called 2 local television stations to report what he had done and asked that the reporters leave his family alone. The deal also returned confiscated property to his wife, Amy Blom, including a parcel of land on Moose Lake, a home in Richfield and the family car. For the Poirier family, the confession was devastating because they had hoped Kathy was still alive. Blom now claimed that she had been murdered and cremated for no reason other than his nocturnal impulse, which he could not explain. Blom soon recanted, saying he made a false confession due to the stress of solitary confinement and the medication he was taking. He said he was hallucinating and believed the only way to escape from the cell was to tell the authorities what they wanted to hear. But he was out of his mind, he now claimed, and didn't know what he was saying. The plea bargain had been canceled, and lawyers for both sides were preparing for trial. There are different types of false confessions. and sometimes people just spontaneously confess to something they did not do. This usually happens in response to a high-profile case. Some people expect the interrogation to be too intense, so they quickly succumb to the pressure to confess. But there is another type of phenomenon that can occur. People may internalize assertions of guilt from the police and come to believe that they have committed a crime that they were not involved in. Whether Blom actually confessed to perjury or recanted his testimony is now for the jury to decide. Blom was brought to trial. The trial began in June 2000 and took 5 weeks for jury selection. The trial took another 5 weeks, during which more than 50 witnesses, including several key witnesses, were called to testify. The case was opened by Carleton County Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Thomas Pertler. Among the first witnesses, Blom's brother testified that he had given the family a box of old clothes, including a New York Yankees jersey. Blom had previously said he had never owned such a shirt. Even more damaging was the testimony of 2 women whom Blom kidnapped in 1983, who agreed to testify about how he treated them. The jury learned firsthand what he was capable of. Both women, being young girls at the time, looked like Kathy. Forensic odontologists then confirmed that the partial tooth matched Kathy's age, gender, and dental records. Dr. Ann Norlander admitted that at first she was not sure it was even a tooth. At the hearing, she testified that with a reasonable degree of medical certainty, the tooth belonged to Kathy. It was the discovery of chemicals in the filling material that led her to that conclusion. A surveillance video from another store that captured Blom back in May showed that around the time of the kidnapping, his hair, now gray, had blonde tips, as his barber confirmed, making him look younger. Most revealing was Blom's confession, which the judge allowed into evidence. Each juror was given a transcript for further review. Thereafter, there was silence in the courtroom, save for the quiet sobs of Kathy's relatives. The case against Blom seemed pretty strong at that point. Rodney Roden, lead defense attorney, called his first witness on August 7th. Amy Blom testified that her husband was home the night Katie disappeared. Speaking from the bench, she said she guessed where her husband was that day because she saw a broadcast the next day about the girl's disappearance. She called attention to it because the location of her disappearance was near the country house they owned on Moose Lake, 110 miles from their home. Because Blom had a criminal record, she figured he would be a suspect, so she later realized exactly where he had been the night before. Blom returned home at 9:30 p.m., and they had already gone to bed. When his spouse woke up in the morning, coffee was ready, his spouse was home. She also testified that the police officers bullied her, threatening to take her children away if she didn't answer questions the way they wanted her to. "They called me a liar," she said. She also denied that she had ever seen a baseball jersey in the clothes her son-in-law gave them, and said she had never seen her husband wear one. As she spoke, Blom wept, visibly wiping his eyes. On August 10th, Blom took the stand in his own defense. Under oath, he denied that he had kidnapped Kathy Poirier. He remained on the witness stand for more than 3 hours, alternately talking and crying. He claimed that his life was falling apart, and he felt ill at the time he admitted to the investigation that he had committed the crime. He added that his wife was threatening to leave his life due to media pressure, so he decided to do everything he could to free himself from the cell he was imprisoned in. He spent quite a bit of time trying to get the jury to feel sorry for him, as if he was the victim. He agreed that he had made a confession, but said he had also recanted it. He now claimed that he was not at Moose Lake the night of the crime, but rather he was sleeping at home with his wife, as she had told him. Although he had been fishing there earlier in the evening, he was home at 10 p.m., well before Katie was taken from the store. Later on cross-examination, Blom was forced to admit the lies and inconsistencies in his statements to the police at the beginning of the investigation, so appearing in court did him no good. To many, he appeared to be a whiner trying to get away with it once again. When the questioning ended, Blom looked frustrated. He turned to the judge, cursed, and asked if he could only make one statement. After a negative answer, the case went to the jury. After 10 hours of deliberation, 3 of which were spent replaying the taped confessions, the jury found Donald Blom guilty. He received a life sentence without parole. Blom continued to insist that it wasn't over and predicted that one day he would be exonerated. "I never killed anyone," he insisted. He was sure he had a strong case for appeal. But in 2004, the appeals court issued an 81-page ruling that upheld the conviction. Although his trial was not perfect, the judges decided it had been fair. They saw no reason to overturn the ruling or order a new trial. The murder of Caitlin Poirier led to the passage of Katie's Law, which included the development of a statewide computerized crime-fighting network, tightening the requirements for tracking predatory sex offenders like Blom. Let's visit the small and picturesque town of Griffin, located in the state of Georgia, in the southeastern United States of America. Rightfully considered one of Georgia's oldest towns, Griffin was founded in 1840 and has since played a significant role in the state's history. All this influence of the past can be seen in its architecture and preserved monuments. The historical center of the town is imbued with the spirit of antiquity, where old brick buildings intertwine with modernity. Its rich history, stunning architecture, beautiful parks, and a variety of flavors make it a true gem of the South in the United States. Today, our story is full of intrigue and unexpected twists of fate, at the end of which each of you will ask yourself one question: where is the truth? Mary Catherine never thought that one careless act would lead to such terrible consequences. When the judge entered the courtroom, a special atmosphere of tension and anticipation appeared in the room. Everyone present focused and froze in anticipation of the verdict. The attorneys have done a tremendous amount of work, provided accurate arguments, and in case of an unexpected verdict, they already plan their performance and are ready for appeals and objections. The judge gives the floor to the jury, and they announce their verdict. At the end of a week-long trial and a 4-hour jury deliberation, Mary Catherine was found not guilty and acquitted on all charges. But let's return to this joyful note to the origins of the story and try to understand together what led the young woman to the defendant's bench and whether it could have been prevented. Steven Andrew Freeman was born on January 1st, 1995, in Thomaston, Georgia, to Troy and Jennifer Freeman. He and his brother Blake grew up as happy, healthy children without any problems with their parents or society. Kind and responsive, Steven had many friends. Everyone described him as an exceptionally calm and balanced person. Steven grew up in Griffin, where he later attended Spalding High School and Gordon State College to complete his education. Mary Catherine Higdon was also raised in a respectable family, somewhat carefree, impetuous, humorous, friendly. She was drawn to creativity. She often put on mini-plays and performed them in front of her family and neighbors. Mary and Steven fell in love with each other in their senior years and have been inseparable since. The young couple had a lot of common interests. Both loved being in nature. They went hiking, fishing, and even hunting together. In 2012, Steven Freeman updated his Facebook status to say he was in a relationship and regularly posted various photos with his beloved. Mary's family was fond of her boyfriend. Steve's parents, in turn, also accepted his girlfriend as their own daughter. After graduating from school, the young people moved in together. Steven got a job as a plumber at Drain Right Gutters and Roofing Inc., and Mary Catherine worked as a teacher's assistant at St. George's Episcopal School. She also worked part-time as a salesperson at a gun store. By the summer of 2018, Steven and Mary had been living together for 7 years, but had not gotten married. On August 1st, 2018, at 10:42 p.m., emergency services received an alarm call. The caller, 24-year-old Mary Catherine Higdon, screamed hysterically into the phone that she had accidentally shot her boyfriend. She reported grabbing a Glock 43 firearm, unaware that there was a bullet in the chamber. When paramedics and police arrived at Sunnybrook Drive, the girl was in a state of shock. She knelt in front of the motionless and bloodied body of the young man lying on the bed, crying incessantly, gasping and begging the doctors to help him. "I can't lose him. I can't lose him," she cried hoarsely.
Law enforcement officers struggled to pull Mary Catherine away from the victim to examine him and provide first aid. 23-year-old Steven Freeman, wounded in the chest just below the neck, was still breathing. He was immediately transported to Spalding Regional Hospital. Unfortunately, a few minutes before midnight, the young man's heart stopped. Not fully comprehending the tragedy that had occurred and still in shock, Mary had to visit the police station to give her account of the events. She was called in for questioning, where the girl, still completely stunned, claimed that the shot was accidental. She explained that there had always been firearms in their home and that Steven would leave a pistol on the nightstand for self-defense before going to sleep, as their house was located outside the city. On that fateful evening, she merely wanted to hand Steven the pistol, and it accidentally discharged. She had no idea the gun was loaded. Mary Catherine insisted that Steven Freeman was the love of her life. She would never harm him, especially not intentionally. Examining the scene, investigators did not rule out the possibility that the act might have been premeditated, and they had substantial arguments to support this theory. There were signs of a struggle in the kitchen, with food and dishes scattered about. Detectives Adam Trammell and Chris Wilson found Mary's story improbable and continued the investigation, examining the evidence. Mary Catherine was called in for a second interrogation, where the investigators employed pressure tactics. They yelled at the suspect, expressed disbelief in her story, and demanded the truth. It worked. Mary Catherine confessed to shooting her boyfriend in anger. She shared that they had a severe argument, and she wanted to leave him. Having recorded the conversation, the investigators had an admission of guilt, indicating a case solved with a heartfelt confession. However, a serious technical problem arose, causing most of the recording to be lost, save for interference and indistinct noises. How this happened was unexplainable, as was the reason why no one thought to make a backup copy of this crucial piece of evidence. Further investigation revealed that the pistol could not have fired accidentally, as it required a trigger pull. Moreover, for the bullet to hit Steven as it did, the pistol had to be pointed at the victim. Detectives also questioned Mary's behavior. Some suspected she was overacting, demonstrating her distress in an exaggerated manner. The detectives didn't stop for a moment, piecing together their version of the tragedy with new evidence and proof. Another critical fact cast doubt on the accident and Mary Catherine's words. Investigators learned that the girl worked at a gun store, where employees undergo thorough training on handling various firearms before starting work. This meant she undoubtedly knew how to safely hand over a pistol without causing harm. The picture of an accident didn't align with the new facts that the investigation uncovered. The woman changed her statement several times. Sometimes her hysterical state interrupted the interrogation, but she reiterated time and again that it was an accident. However, in another conversation, Mary Catherine let slip to the police that at Steven's request she tossed the pistol to hand it to him, and the weapon accidentally discharged. This didn't match what she told investigators of the scene and during the first interrogation. Back then, Mary repeatedly stated that she was simply handing Steven the pistol hand to hand, not tossing it, and that's when it accidentally fired below his neck. These changing statements worked against Mary Catherine, as she was caught lying, and every word was scrutinized for hidden intent, indicating guilt concealment. Mary was detained and remained in Spalding County Jail during the trial.
She was charged with felony murder, malice murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. Lieutenant Wilson vehemently contested Mary's claim of it being an accident and tried to prove her guilt in the deliberate and meticulously planned act. A new piece of evidence in this case was common cooking grease found on the slide of the pistol. The slide also had lubricant, suggesting that at some point, the magazine must have been emptied. Bullets were loaded, inserted back into the pistol and placed on a shelf. In her defense, Mary Catherine told the police that she indeed was preparing dinner for Steven that evening. the very dinner that was found scattered on the kitchen floor, explaining the presence of grease on the slide. Subsequent interrogations of the couple's relatives and friends did not provide the clarity expected in this case. Many friends claimed that this teenage love turned into a roller coaster ride for Steven and Mary until the very end. Their relationship, at times nearly ending, then reigniting with new passion, became genuinely complicated in recent years. The lovers often quarreled over emerging disagreements. Mary turned every argument into a drama. She screamed at Steven and attacked him, after which he often left the house to spend the night with friends, turning off his phone as Mary continued to call and text him. She tried to control his every move, driving Steven to frustration. The guy shared with friends that Mary, during arguments and fights, pointed the pistol at him or herself, threatening to end her life or his. Steven never reported this to the police, fearing Mary would be jailed. And this was not the only instance when Mary resorted to using a weapon. And there were plenty of weapons in their home. During an interrogation, Steven's friend Thomas Skinner shared that 2 days before the tragedy, on July 30th, 2018, Steven and Mary Catherine exchanged warm messages, wishing each other a good day. The next day, July 31st, Steven told his mother that he would not return home to that devil and stayed the night at Thomas's place. On August 1st, 2018, when Steven didn't come home to sleep, Mary sent him hundreds of messages begging him to return. That evening, she prepared dinner and waited for her beloved. From Steven's mother, she learned he was at his friend Thomas's place and went to pick him up. She encountered them on the road and, rolling down the window, shouted that she was waiting for him at home for dinner. Steven replied that he was coming home. The evening, instead of a reconciliatory dinner, ended in tragedy. The police believed the case was closed as a premeditated act, driven by Mary Catherine's anger. But her defense team revealed another side to the young couple's life, known to few. On June 17, 2019, almost a year after Steven's death, his beloved Mary Catherine Higdon stood trial. Before the hearing, Mary Higdon was offered a plea deal for life imprisonment with the possibility of parole if she pled guilty. However, she refused the deal, insisting she could never harm Steven because he was the love of her life. At the initial hearings, Mary Higdon defended herself vehemently. She repeatedly claimed it was an accident and that she loved Steven Freeman. She also surprised many by accusing her boyfriend of abusive behavior towards her. She claimed he hit her twice and even forced himself on her. On the day of the tragedy, he allegedly attacked her, and she had to defend herself. It turned out the couple's relationship had been deteriorating over some time. Friends and relatives claimed Mary Higdon was furious because Steven often ignored her messages and calls. She demanded attention and pursued him, especially insistently lately.
Allegedly, on the night of the act when Steven Freeman finally came home, he refused to eat the dinner Mary had prepared for him, which became the last straw for her. She couldn't hold back and fired at him. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard stated in court that there was physical evidence supporting that Mary Catherine shot Steven in anger after he didn't come home for dinner and ignored her calls and text messages. As physical evidence, the grease found on the pistol and the sheet taken from the mattress where Steven lay bleeding were presented. The sheet was shown as a key piece of evidence that Steven was not attacking Mary but was sitting still in one spot. Forensic experts examined the blood stains and determined that at the moment of the shot, Steven was not moving or approaching Mary Catherine, but was calmly sitting on the bed. If he had been moving, blood would have been everywhere, not just in one corner of the sheet. This only confirmed that the accused's version was once again false. In court, faced directly with the possibility of life imprisonment and finally believing in what was happening, Mary Catherine took a risky decision to give truthful testimony in court. With tears in her eyes in front of the judge and numerous attendees, she once again portrayed Steven Freeman as a harsh and controlling tyrant, and with certain evidence, she managed to do so. The defense stuck to the self-defense narrative, presenting the argument that erupted into a scandal between Mary and Steven on the evening of the tragedy where Mary fired at him in defense. Mary Catherine sorrowfully shared numerous stories from her life where Steven had hurt her. She confessed he had repeatedly hit her face, shaken her, and threatened punishment for any minor misconduct or disobedience. Living with Steven, I experienced all kinds of pressure imaginable: verbal insults, physical attacks, and even assault. He constantly controlled and manipulated me. He needed to know where I was, who I was with, what I was doing, how I was spending money, and even what I was eating. He drove me to despair with unreasonable jealousy. I never reported him to the police because I loved and feared him. The defense presented ample evidence to support her claims, revealing not just text messages taken from Mary's old phone, but also a correspondence that raised significant questions about who was the real tyrant and betrayer in this relationship. The text messages, dating back over a year and a half between her and Steven, not only proved the boy's harshness, but also the girl's infidelity. Some message snippets showed Steven indeed insulting Mary Catherine with harsh words and threatening her with repercussions upon his return from fishing. However, the reason for his anger was much more disdainful. Steven's friends confirmed that at that moment, he was indeed very angry with his girlfriend for being unfaithful, which Mary denied. Mary Catherine shared that Steven had forced himself on her twice, and she feared he would hurt her again on August 1st, 2018, leading her to act in self-defense. The defense called an expert and close relatives of Mary who could attest to the domestic violence. Mary's sister, Sarah Higdon, testified, affirmatively stating she saw bruises on Mary's arm 2 weeks before the shooting. She expressed regret for not photographing it and believing Mary's explanation that it happened accidentally. A tearful Mary Higdon explained to the jury that on that fateful night, she decided to break up with Steven once and for all, telling him to leave the house. Steven became angry and attacked her. In defense, she grabbed the pistol from the nightstand and accidentally fired. After Mary Catherine's emotional testimony, the prosecution and defense engaged in a fierce battle, with Steven's former friends, who had been close to Mary for years, desperately trying to idealize their deceased friend.
Thomas Skinner, Steven's best friend, described the victim as a loyal and hard-working country boy, and Mary Catherine as an obsessive and possessive girlfriend who constantly controlled and stalked him. He claimed Mary Catherine and Steven's relationship had become toxic over the last few years, with her threatening to end her life whenever Steven tried to leave her, and once, after an argument, she pointed a pistol at her head in front of him. Another witness, Steven's co-worker Alicia Varela, testified that Mary Catherine obsessively called Steven throughout the day, even when he was at work. However, in Mary's supposedly truthful court testimony, where she framed the shooting as self-defense, she missed an important detail that prosecutor Kate Lenhard pointed out. Mary talked a lot about their interactions and how, after many years of perfect relations, they suddenly started to degrade and physically abuse each other. But she never mentioned the moment of supposed self-defense when she actually pulled the trigger. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard was not convinced by such an admission, noting that in cross-examination, Mary never once mentioned any harsh treatment by Steven. She repeatedly asked Mary Catherine whether a woman, being safe at home, would go after her assailant late at night to bring him back home. The answer was not convincing, and the prosecutor continued her statement, embodying that dreadful scene of the accidental shooting. Kate Lenhard picked up the pistol and recreated the moment as she saw it. According to her version, Steven came home. Then, after hearing Mary out, they argued, and he refused to have dinner. Mary, enraged, scattered the prepared food around the kitchen. Steven, trying to avoid further conflict, went to the bedroom and sat on the bed. Likely he was waiting for her to calm down, but Mary, ready for confrontation, called out to him twice without receiving a response, walked into the bedroom, and shot him in the neck, on the left side, since he hadn't turned to face her. In her closing arguments, Kate Lenhard reminded the jury of the various stories and versions that kept changing at every police interrogation and court hearing. Mary Catherine Higdon spared no details in her emotional testimony about the alleged abuse from Steven Freeman. But before handing the case over to the jury, Kate Lenhard desperately pleaded to consider this story not as a case of self-defense, but as a case of extreme manipulation. Despite the lost confession recording, the prosecution presented other evidence and counter-arguments. The forensic examination proved that Steven Freeman was sitting on the bed at the moment of the shooting. Hence, he couldn't have been attacking Mary Higdon. Mary claimed they kept the gun in the house unloaded. Detectives suspected that the pistol was indeed loaded in advance on the evening of August 1st, 2018, when Mary was preparing a roast for Steven. This was the only explanation for how grease marks not only got on part of the slide but also inside the pistol. Had Mary Catherine really loaded the pistol in advance? Colleagues, neighbors, family, friends, and acquaintances of Steven Freeman unanimously testified that he was not prone to aggression. Prosecutors also pointed out that Mary Catherine Higdon changed details of her story at least 10 times since the first interrogation, attributing such changes to fear. Mary Catherine refused a plea deal, as she could have been facing the death penalty. The wait for the verdict felt like an eternity to her. After hearing all witnesses and the accused, the case was handed over to the jury. Just 10 minutes later, the jury was ready to announce their decision. However, 2 jurors out of 10 had doubts about some aspects of the prosecution's story. They were concerned that investigators, so eager to charge Mary Catherine with premeditated action, had not fully checked crucial facts. Questions were raised about the lack of a complete investigation into Steven Freeman's phone, checking his text messages, and browsing history. The prosecution simply hadn't done this. Besides Mary's lies, no sufficient evidence was presented against her. The arguments presented by jurors Victor and Chris had an effect. The jury deliberated and returned a unanimous verdict, not guilty. A few hours later, Mary Catherine Higdon was free. After a lengthy deliberation, the 12 jurors concluded the following. On the first charge, malicious action, the defendant was found not guilty. On the second charge, serious action, the defendant was found not guilty. When the judge acquitted Mary Catherine Higdon on all charges, including intentional action, reckless action, assault with a deadly weapon, and carrying a weapon during the commission of a crime, many people in the courtroom were shocked. Watching the woman who took her son's life walk out of the courtroom, Jennifer Freeman could barely contain her anger towards the jurors. Everyone who supported Steven's family was also stunned by such a verdict. After the trial ended in her favor, Mary Catherine returned home to be with her family in Griffin. Since then, she has stayed out of the limelight and is almost absent from social media, likely to avoid undue attention from the media and the public. Her Instagram profile is private, and no further details about her current whereabouts are known. It's assumed that Mary Catherine has moved on from her harrowing past to live a quiet and unnoticeable life. Steven Freeman's mother dedicated a farewell post to her son on social media. Steven lived a life filled with love, joy, compassion, and loyalty. Everyone was his friend, and those who enjoyed hunting and fishing with him were his closest. He had a heart of gold and a charming southern smile. Steven showed his love for you by making you feel like you were the only person in the world, making you laugh until your stomach hurt, always smiling broadly, hugging you, and never leaving your side. These 3 simple words, I love you, have always inspired me. So who really pulled the trigger in this story? That's a question you must answer for yourself, as all the answers in this story are evident. By analyzing and presenting the situation, it's up to everyone to decide whether Mary Catherine is guilty or if it was a tragic accident that cost a young man his life. How much do you agree with the 2 jurors who changed the course of a young woman's life, giving her a second chance? Mary Catherine likely lives a quiet life away from the spotlight now that she has managed to leave her terrible past behind. The case involving the crime against 8 members of the Roden family became one of the most notorious and complex in Ohio. Overnight, the motto, all for one and one for all, became fatal for each family member. Only the minor children were spared from the mass violence. The investigation spanned over 10 states in the USA. Detectives conducted more than 600 interviews, gathering around 700 witness statements. Various theories were considered: self-harm, retaliation by illegal substance dealers, and cult sacrifices. Attorney General Mike DeWine even suspected local residents of withholding crucial information. It seemed the investigation had hit a dead end. Until a moment came, when a solution, lying on the surface, became apparent. As it turns out, the most complex situations are often rooted in simplicity. This story illustrates how familial bonds turned into a bloodbath. In Pike County, Ohio, USA, it all began with a simple crush. Hannah Mae Roden was 13 years old when she met 18-year-old Edward Jake Wagner. The young man invited her to the prom. From that evening on, they were inseparable. Their relationship elicited mixed feelings. Undoubtedly, the love that blossomed between them was visible to the naked eye. On the other hand, the age difference raised many questions and doubts. However, the young couple's parents did not obstruct their relationship. After all, everyone had been young once. Over time, the Roden and Wagner families started spending weekends and parties together. Love was passionate and carefree. When Hannah turned 15, she announced her pregnancy. Upon hearing the news, Jake was overjoyed. He anticipated how delighted his family would be with the new addition. The Wagners highly valued traditions and lineage, hence adored children. In them, they saw the continuation of their lineage. Even ancestral names were passed down from generation to generation. Jake's father was named George Wagner III, and his brother, George Wagner IV. The Rodens, on the other hand, had a simpler, less ostentatious approach to children, but this did not diminish their family values. Christopher and Dana Roden, Hannah's parents, remained very close and united even after their divorce. They loved their 3 children and dedicated their lives to their well-being. Unlike the Wagners, the Roden family had a modest income. 40-year-old Christopher worked as a handyman at the Big Bear Lake family complex, while 37-year-old Dana was a nurse's aide at a youth rehabilitation center. Nevertheless, they managed to instill humanity and diligence in Christopher Jr., Hannah, and Clarence, Frankie. Everyone was thrilled about the arrival of little Sophie. To celebrate her birthday, a grand party was organized. Soon after, Jake suggested that Hannah move in with him and his family, arguing that it would make life more comfortable for both of them, a point hard to contest when living in a trailer. His logic seemed sound, but Hannah declined. By that time, she had come to understand her partner better and saw the invitation as an attempt to limit her independence. Moreover, the once caring and attentive young man had become suspicious and aggressive. Jake had resorted to physical aggression on several occasions. His rough behavior cooled Hannah's feelings for him. Her refusal became a bone of contention for the Wagners. Now, each of Sophie's parents was determined to gain full custody of the girl. The families began to advocate for their own interests. Driven by his desire, Jake went as far as to threaten his beloved, angry that she refused to sign a document transferring custody rights to him and his brother. In a fit of anger, he once messaged her, saying that if necessary, he would take the daughter by force. "If you truly loved her, you wouldn't resist. You would have long ago handed her over to be raised in a healthy environment," he claimed. For some reason, he believed the Rodens posed a danger to Sophie. Such conversations continued for 2 years, during which Jake became more tyrannical. Hannah grew tired of the total control and in March 2015 completely ended the relationship. Moreover, she had come to know something alarming. It turned out that Jake's brother, George IV, had gained custody of a son by threatening the boy's mother with a weapon. This confirmed that the Wagners saw moral and physical coercion as acceptable means. To protect herself and her daughter from this unscrupulous family, the young Roden decided to distance herself. She wanted to raise her daughter alone while working as a nurse's assistant and finishing school. The situation worsened when everyone learned about Hannah's second pregnancy. Although she claimed the child was from another man, Jake had his doubts. He attempted to find out if she was seeing someone else. So, in December 2015, He hacked into her social media accounts, but found nothing incriminating. At the end of his search, he noticed that the woman was communicating with George IV's former mother-in-law, which sparked genuine interest. A court case was soon to follow, during which the Wagner family repeatedly interacted with the woman. "They'll have to eliminate me before they can take custody of my daughter," Hannah wrote in her message. Jake shared the details of the correspondence with his family, infuriating them. Then his maternal grandmother, 65-year-old Rita Newcomb, forged an important document regarding custody. Moreover, during a court session to determine the granddaughter's residence, Christopher Roden and George Wagner III had a serious disagreement. Ultimately, the relationship between the families completely deteriorated. Soon, a terrible idea occurred to the Wagner family. Hannah was so uncooperative that they felt the need to eliminate her, as well as the entire Roden family, who could claim custody of Sophie. This insane thought turned into a monstrous plan that solidified by Christmas 2016. People's thoughts during the festive season are usually focused on love and creation, which cannot be said for the Wagner couple, who organized a vote. It was decided whether they would implement their plan. All family members agreed. The only thing left was to assign roles and prepare. 5 months were spent studying the Roden homes and surveillance cameras, with special attention to their daily routines and work schedules. Each person in the criminal plot was responsible for something. For instance, Angela Wagner bought sneakers for all family members to wear at a predetermined time. To prevent the victims from seeking help, she acquired a special device to block communication, planning to secretly install it on the Rodens' phones. To minimize noise, George III suggested making homemade silencers. He also took care of the transportation on the night of the crime, aiming to secure a van that would not draw attention. Sophie was to stay safe at home with Angela, as the court had granted Hannah and Jake joint custody. The Wagners chose a time when it was their turn to look after the girl, meticulously planning every detail for a flawless execution. On the night of April 21, 2016, George Wagner III decided to visit Christopher Roden, allegedly to offer him a job opportunity that could improve his financial situation. The job offer was merely a pretext to gain entry into the house. Unsuspectingly, Roden Sr. opened the door. On the morning of April 22, 2016, at about 8 p.m., Bobby Jo Manley, Dana Roden's sister, entered Christopher's trailer. She did this daily since the day he had offered her a job. Bobby took care of the animals belonging to the Roden family. She noticed someone was inside, which was unusual for that time when everyone typically went about their business. Inside the trailer, in a pool of blood, lay Christopher and 38-year-old Gary, his cousin. The men lived together. In horror, she grabbed the phone and dialed emergency services, reporting what she had seen and requesting assistance at 4077 Union Hill Road. Shocked, Bobby proceeded to the homes of other relatives. She knocked loudly on one of their doors. Soon, a 3-year-old boy, Clarence Roden's son, appeared. She asked him where his parents were, but the boy did not respond, only pointing towards the bed. Entering the house, she screamed at the sight of 20-year-olds Clarence and Hannah Hazel, his wife. The couple was deceased, with their 6-month-old baby stirring between them, alive but splattered with the blood of his parents. After Bobby's 911 call, the police immediately headed to the given address. As they approached the Roden property, they were stopped by a neighbor. Sensing trouble, he asked the officers to check 2 more addresses of the family members. He was right. In the 3rd trailer, police found bloodied bodies. The victims were identified as Dana, 19-year-old Hannah, and 16-year-old Christopher. The attackers spared Hannah's youngest child, a baby girl only a few days old. Later, another victim was discovered, 44-year-old Kenneth, the elder Roden's brother, who lived a 15-minute walk from the others. By 2 in the afternoon, 8 victims had been identified: Christopher, Dana, Clarence, Hannah Hazel, Christopher Jr., Hannah May, Kenneth, and Gary. The only survivors were small children, a 3-year-old, a 6-month-old baby, and a newborn just 4 days old, along with 2-year-old Sophie, who was at the Wagner's home at the time of the incident. After examining the bodies, police surmised that all of the victims had been killed in their sleep by gunshot wounds. Detectives later pieced together the events of that night. The patriarch of the family was awake when the attackers burst into the house, as evidenced by a wound on his right arm. Christopher attempted to defend himself, but was hit with 9 shots to the head, torso, and limbs. 5 bullets were removed from Dana Roden's neck and head. The rest of the family was killed by gunshots to the head. Gary was shot 5 times. Christopher Jr. was shot 4 times. Clarence and his wife Hannah were shot 3 times each, and Hannah Mae was shot twice. Kenneth was the only one to be shot once. In total, the assailants fired 32 shots, some even posthumously. In addition, bruises were found on some of the bodies, indicating physical abuse. Since no one in the vicinity heard anything, investigators concluded that the perpetrators used silencers, indicating a carefully planned and executed act. It was clear that the victims were not random. Someone wanted revenge on the entire family. During the search, police found 5 Remington shell casings of different types and an unused bullet from a different model of gun. In addition, the scattered nature of the trailers indicated that more than one person had committed the crime. Leonard Manley, Dana's father, claimed, "The criminals knew the Rodens well, or the dogs would have been barking all over the pike." The question of who dared to commit such an act kept police officers busy. The Attorney General's office provided more than $20,000 for the funeral of the Roden family. The deceased were interred in several stages. On April 28, 2016, Gary was the first of the victims to be buried in South Shore, Kentucky. He was followed by Hannah Hazel, whose farewell was held on May 1st in the village of Otway, Scioto County, Ohio. The other victims were buried on May 3rd in West Portsmouth, in the same county. Many local residents came to say goodbye to the family and pay their respects. As for the fate of the surviving children, they were placed in the care of relatives. A wave of panic swept through the neighborhood. The police urged the relatives of the Rodens to take necessary precautions and advised all residents of Pike to stay away from their homes at night. The cold-blooded mass murder outraged residents across the state, who demanded that the results of the investigation be made public and that the perpetrators be apprehended as soon as possible. Cincinnati businessman Jeff Ruby offered $25,000 for information that would help arrest and convict those involved in the murder, but he later declined the reward offer. No less than 100 individuals were part of the investigative task force working on the Roden case. Following the funerals as part of the investigation, 3 trailers belonging to the slain family were towed away. The following day, several more vehicles met the same fate, all transported to a secure facility. This was done to preserve evidence and protect the personal belongings of the deceased. After the investigation, the family's cars and farming equipment were planned to be returned to the victims' relatives. Forensic specialists joined the investigation. Trailers were meticulously examined. However, no DNA of the suspects was found in any of them. Cameras had been installed in the mobile homes, but they too provided no information as they had been disabled. Those who planned the crime had thought through every detail meticulously. It seemed there were no significant leads until detectives discovered something. Cannabis crops were found at 3 crime scenes. In one location, there were about 200 plants. Officers believed the cannabis was grown for sale, not personal use, leading to speculation about the involvement of Mexican drug traffickers. However, the amount of cannabis found was too insignificant to suggest an attack by an entire cartel. In January 2017, a close relative of the Roden family was arrested for drug trafficking, which was considered a coincidental circumstance. Leonard Manley stated that his daughter had no involvement with the cannabis operations. "They're trying to drag Dana through the mud, and I don't like it," he asserted. Some family members confirmed that Christopher and Kenneth Roden, the older brothers, grew marijuana, but were unaware of any large-scale cultivation. The theory of a family feud over criminally obtained money was also debunked. Alongside the prohibited substances, specialized equipment for breeding chickens for cockfighting, as well as cages with fighting cocks, were found at the Rodens. It soon became clear that illegal cockfights were not the cause of the homicides either. Months went by without uncovering the true motive behind the crime. It reached a point where, on April 13, 2017, local authorities announced they lacked sufficient evidence to make any arrests. Nevertheless, prosecutor Rob Young stated the investigation was ongoing, suggesting they had some leads they were not yet ready to disclose. Another year passed, and the second anniversary of the mass crime received little attention, with no coverage in the local press, and neither the sheriff nor the prosecutor attending the memorial service. This led the community to believe the investigation had stalled. Unexpectedly, on May 12, 2017, a SWAT team raided a home in Pike County, 10 miles from the crime scene, initially searching for suspects, but later revealed to be gathering evidence. Detectives also searched a house in Adams County once owned by Jake Wagner, though he had sold it by then. On June 20, 2017, the investigation publicly shifted focus to the Wagner family. 26-year-old Jake, 27-year-old George III, 47-year-old George IV, and 48-year-old Angela, who lived 15 miles from the victims. The Wagners had moved to Connell, Alaska, citing difficulties staying in the area. They claimed to have loved the Roden family, stating their deaths caused them immense suffering. Rob Young's words from a year earlier proved true, as the investigation had made a breakthrough and was now seeking information from the public on the Wagners' discussions about firearms, ammunition, vehicles, etc. 2 years prior. It wasn't long before the suspects, running low on funds, returned to Ohio, where detectives had gathered enough evidence for arrests, including proving Jake had hacked into Hannah's account. During the examination of the Wagner family's devices, search queries related to guardianship were discovered. It was also found that Angela had purchased sneakers for the entire family just a few weeks before the crime. The tread pattern of one of these matched that found in one of the trailers. Officers believed Angela was the mastermind behind the horrific scheme, with Jake as the primary executor. According to the investigation, each family member was involved in the criminal act. On November 13, 2018, the Attorney General announced the arrest of the Wagner couple, as well as their sons. They were charged with planning and carrying out the termination of life. Rita Newcomb, Angela's 65-year-old mother, and Frederica Wagner, George III's mother, were also arrested. They faced charges of perjury and obstructing justice. In 2019, Rita Newcomb underwent handwriting analysis, which proved her involvement in forging a guardianship document for Sophie. Later, to avoid imprisonment, she struck a plea deal. The charges against Frederica Wagner were dropped in June 2019. The other Wagners remained incarcerated, having refused to cooperate with the investigation. They denied any involvement in the deaths of the Rodens and expressed sorrow over their passing, wishing for the real perpetrators to be caught. However, on April 22, 2021, 5 years after the tragic incident, Jake decided to make a deal with the prosecution. The agreement was that he would disclose details of the crime in exchange for all family members receiving life sentences instead of the death penalty. Wagner Jr. admitted to taking the lives of 5 out of 8 individuals. Thus, he pleaded guilty to 23 criminal charges, including 8 counts of aggravated crime. The remaining charges included burglary, conspiracy, illegal possession of dangerous ammunition, forgery of evidence and documents, interception of telegrams and oral messages, unauthorized use of property, obstruction of justice, involvement in corrupt activities, and unlawful intimate conduct with a young woman. He indicated that eliminating the mother was seen as the only way to secure custody of his daughter. By taking Hannah's life, he felt compelled to do the same to the other Rodens, fearing they would seek vengeance and refuse to relinquish the girl. The next to stand trial was Angela. On September 10th, she pled guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated crime, robbery, and evidence tampering. She also agreed to testify against the other defendants. In exchange, the charge of ending a life was dropped. Angela was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The trial of George Wagner IV began on August 28, 2022. The man denied any involvement in the crimes, insisting he was completely unaware. Conversely, the prosecution argued his participation in planning, executing, and concealing the crimes. Ultimately, George IV was found guilty on 22 counts and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The trial for George III is scheduled for February 2024. Despite his entire family being convicted, he continues to claim innocence, likely facing the same fate as his older son. This once harmonious relationship ended in tragedy. The collective madness of the Wagners is beyond understanding and forgiveness. Their actions left 3 children orphaned. What will become of Sophie when she grows up and realizes what happened? In their fight for custody and a facade of well-being, the Wagners deprived the young girl of loving parents, relatives, and a peaceful life.
Envy and insatiable greed, potent and dark emotions, often lead individuals down the path of crime. When mixed with unbridled lust and an obsessive need to control others, these feelings can shape a horrifying, lethal intent. It's a chilling concept, and it becomes even more sinister when these emotions fester secretly within a family unit. This narrative unfolds in a Sydney suburb, revolving around the Lynn family, a seemingly harmonious and large household. Their story escalated into one of the most infamous and bloody crimes in Australian history. The complexity and duration of the investigation are noteworthy as the perpetrator grew confident in escaping justice. His meticulously crafted and brutally executed plan was nearly flawless. However, a minor overlooked detail eventually led the police to the breakthrough they needed. Let's delve into the beginning of this saga, exploring how a cocktail of greed, envy for others' success, and corrupt passion can drive someone to madness, transforming them into a monstrous figure who didn't even spare children in their rampage. The Lynn family story, a portrait of love, ambition, and tragic end. Min Lin and Yun Lily. Lynn's love story began in the late 1980s during their college years at an Australian university. Both natives of China, they had separately emigrated to pursue higher education, Lily through an exchange program, and Min, who was 2 years her senior, remained in the country for a professional internship after completing his bachelor's degree. Their paths crossed in a university corridor, leading to what they later recalled as love at first sight. Sharing common roots and dreams, both felt like outsiders in a foreign land, but were united by their aspirations to start a new life in Australia. After graduation, the couple married and settled in the picturesque and tranquil suburb of North Epping in Sydney. Their love blossomed into a large, tight-knit family, deeply connected and committed to each other. In August 1994, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named June Brenda Lynn, who mostly went by her middle name, Brenda. Henry, their son, was born in 1997, followed by the youngest, Terry, in 2000. Entering the 2000s, Min and Yun decided to embark on a business venture, opening a small newsstand. Their dedication transformed this modest start into a thriving news agency with its publishing arm on Rose Street. The Lynn family's business flourished, enabling them to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle with a spacious home, a luxury car, and prestigious private schooling for their children. Min focused on business affairs while Yun dedicated herself to homemaking and nurturing their children. In their community, the Lyns were well regarded for their hard work, kindness, and philanthropy. They were known as exemplary, caring parents and never engaged in conflicts. Brenda, their eldest, was a standout beauty and an excellent student with a compassionate heart for animals. The boys, Henry and Terry, were energetic and sports-loving, sharing a passion for soccer. The siblings shared a close bond, almost inseparable from each other. Relocating relatives from China to Australia. As the Lynn family settled in Australia and their financial prosperity grew, they began inviting relatives from China to visit, live, or even stay permanently. In the early 2000s, Min's parents were the first to move to North Epping, living nearby and helping with the children. Min's father also worked in their newsstand on weekends. A few years later, Yun's parents also moved to Sydney suburb, with Min and Yun buying them a small house. Yun's sister, Irene, came to live with the Lynns, assisting with household chores and the children. By this time, the Lynn family business was generating substantial income, reportedly nearing $1 million annually. Their venture wasn't just a shop or publishing house. It had become a local hub where people gathered to read and discuss news over coffee. Towards the end of 2007, Min Lin's younger sister, Kathy Lynn, née Shi, and her husband, Liang Bin Robert Z, also moved to Australia, seeking better opportunities in the bustling city of Sydney. They had visited relatives in Australia before and briefly lived in Melbourne, but returned to China. This time, they were determined to settle in Australia permanently. Robert, a former successful ENT doctor in China, decided to switch careers and try entrepreneurship. The Eggsys opened their own restaurant in Sydney, investing all their savings, but the business struggled and soon closed. Subsequent attempts to open a cafe or snack bar also failed. Robert, lacking business acumen and financial management skills, struggled in his new ventures. Eventually, Robert and Kathy moved to North Epping, closer to family. Kathy found work, but Robert remained in a phase of self-discovery, unsure of his future path. The Lynn and Z families were bound not only by kinship, but also by strong friendship. They saw each other almost daily, stayed in constant touch, and often gathered for family meals. Their last such gathering was on the evening of Friday, July 17, 2009, at the home of Kathy and Min's parents. Unbeknownst to them, this would be their final reunion. The Lynn family home, a scene of a gruesome massacre. On the morning of July 18th, the Lynn family's shop remained unexpectedly closed, surprising their regular customers. The shop, which had operated 7 days a week for years, showed no signs of opening, with no notice or warning on the doors. This unusual occurrence raised concerns among the customers and neighboring shop owners. One of them, after several unsuccessful attempts to reach Min, called his sister Kathy to inquire about the situation. Kathy was both surprised and alarmed, knowing her brother had never closed the shop for a day without prior arrangements, often having their father or father-in-law cover for him. She tried calling Min and then his wife Yun, but to no avail. Her calls to their home phone also went unanswered. Worried, Kathy and her husband Robert decided to visit Min's house to ensure everything was all right. Arriving around 9 a.m., they noticed the family car in the driveway and found the front door unlocked, but no sign of the homeowners. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, and calls for the family members went unanswered. The house appeared undisturbed with no signs of forced entry. Kathy, calling out for her brother again, ascended to the second floor. Upon opening the bedroom door of Min and Yun Lin, she screamed in shock and horror, staggering back at the gruesome scene before her. The room was drenched in blood, covering the floor, walls, ceiling, furniture, and curtains. The lifeless body of 43-year-old Yun Lin lay near the bed, mutilated beyond immediate recognition. In the adjacent room where 39-year-old Irene, Yun's sister, slept, the scene was equally ghastly. Irene lay dead in her bed, her face a bloody pulp. In the children's bedrooms, 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry had also been brutally beaten to death, their bodies lying in different corners of the room. Brenda, the 15-year-old daughter, had fortunately been away on a school trip the previous day and was not at home during the tragic night. The body of the household's head, Min Lin, was nowhere to be found, leading to a faint hope that he might be alive, possibly injured, taken hostage, or escaped. Kathy immediately called emergency services, but was so hysterical from the shock that she struggled to convey what had happened. She screamed and cried into the phone, begging for medics to arrive quickly and try to save anyone they could. However, the first responders could only confirm the deaths of all the victims at the scene of the massacre. The morning after, a chilling discovery. Following Kathy's frantic call to emergency services, Robert left to fetch the Lynn parents, who lived about 10 kilometers away from the crime scene. The police and paramedics arrived within minutes, and what they encountered was immediately dubbed as one of the most horrific crime scenes they had ever witnessed. Tragically, it was too late for any member of the Lynn family. Each had been killed by multiple blows to the head with a heavy, blunt object resembling a hammer. However, The lethal weapon was nowhere to be found, leading investigators to conclude that the perpetrator had taken it with them. Min Lin's body was eventually discovered in his own bedroom, covered with a blood-soaked blanket. Like his family, he had been beaten to death in a similar manner. It appeared that he was the first victim, followed by his wife, her sister, and lastly, the two boys. An initial inspection of the crime scene yielded no significant clues or leads. The absence of the lethal weapon, coupled with the fact that valuables and money were left untouched, indicated that the primary objective was the elimination of the Lynn family, rather than robbery. Initially, multiple assailants were suspected, as it seemed unlikely that one person could single-handedly overpower so many. However, evidence suggested that the children were awake and had desperately tried to escape during the attack, as indicated by bloodstains and splatters throughout the house. Interestingly, all adult victims, besides head injuries, also showed signs of strangulation, possibly to minimize resistance during the assault. Identical bloody shoe prints were found in each room, with a unique tread pattern, but the shoe brand couldn't be identified, only its size. No foreign fingerprints were discovered, suggesting that the killer or killers wore gloves. At first, there were no leads or theories about the identity of the perpetrator, as family, friends, and neighbors unanimously stated that the Lynns had no known enemies. The motive for such a brutal massacre of 5 people remained unclear. The time of the attack was established to be between midnight and 3 a.m. on July 18th. The heiress and her guardians, Brenda Lynn, the eldest and now the sole survivor of the extensive Lynn family, was on a school trip to New Caledonia at the time of the tragedy. She first learned of the horrific incident through social media and initially refused to believe that it involved her own family, hoping for some mistake. Her Aunt Kathy soon called her, confirming the dreadful news through tearful sobs. Brenda was quickly flown back to Sydney, where Kathy and Robert, her new guardians, met her at the airport. Brenda moved in with them as the Lynn family home was sealed as a crime scene. The next day, a grief-stricken Brenda was brought to the police station for questioning. However, she could offer no new information, insisting that her family had no enemies or ill-wishers and had noticed nothing unusual before her trip. Following her family's death, Brenda became the heir to a substantial fortune, including property and the family business. However, being a minor and still in school, her legal guardians, Aunt Kathy and her husband Robert, were responsible for managing the estate. Brenda's grandparents also offered their support, but Kathy and Robert insisted on being her primary caretakers. Robert even threatened legal action if the elderly relatives sought custody, arguing they were too old to care for a teenager. Eventually, the matter was settled amicably, and Brenda remained with her aunt and uncle. The Lynn's shop and publishing business, which had been temporarily closed, soon reopened under the management of the Z's, as Brenda was yet to take over the business operations. Robert also began actively reviewing the family's bank accounts, savings, real estate, and other assets. Investigation and theories experts repeatedly scrutinized the crime scene, meticulously documenting every detail. Despite their efforts, no concrete leads emerged. They deduced that the killer likely acted alone and entered the house quietly, suggesting either an unlocked door or the perpetrator having a key. The killer wore size 9.5 shoes with a distinct, ornate tread pattern. The lethal weapon, believed to be a hammer, was never found in or around the house. The killer's use of gloves meant no fingerprints were left behind, and no foreign DNA was found, only traces from the 5 victims. A peculiar and significant detail was that bloodstains were found on the doorknobs of each bedroom where the perpetrators occurred, indicating the killer's bloodied gloves touched them. However, there were no bloodstains on the doorknob of Brenda's room, suggesting the killer knew she was not there. As one of Australia's most high-profile cases, the tragic incident was widely covered in the media. With no substantial evidence or suspects, various improbable theories emerged. Rumors circulated about the Lynn's alleged vast fortune, leading to their demise. There were theories of a robbery gone wrong, and even involvement of local Chinese mafia clans. Such theories weren't entirely dismissed, given the area's history with a burglary gang. The Lynn shop had been attacked months before the tragedy, and Min had witnessed an armored car robbery a week before the fatal incidents. Although the criminals wore masks and Min couldn't identify them, It was speculated he might have been eliminated as a potential witness. Months passed with the investigation at a standstill. None of the theories were substantiated, and no suspects emerged. The robbery theory was eventually ruled out as money and valuables were untouched, and the killer seemed to have a singular purpose: to eliminate the household members. Additionally, the power was cut off in the house on the night of the fatal incidents, indicating the killer knew where the electrical panel was. The assailants' familiarity with the house in total darkness suggested they had been there before and knew the layout, possibly even obtaining a key in advance. A crucial, overlooked clue. While reviewing the perplexing case details for the 100th time, an investigator repeatedly listened to Kathy's emergency call, searching for any overlooked clue. Surprisingly, a significant hint was found in that recording. The recording captured Kathy's hysterical attempts to explain the situation, her words jumbled and interrupted by cries and sobs. At the end of the call, when the operator confirmed that emergency services were en route, Kathy unexpectedly mentioned her husband's name, adding something in Cantonese, addressing him directly. This detail piqued the investigators' interest, prompting them to translate her words. It turned out Kathy was pleading with her husband not to leave her alone in the house. This was significant because Robert had decided to fetch the Lynn parents on his own, leaving Kathy at the grisly crime scene before the police arrived. Robert's behavior seemed highly suspicious. 5 people had just been brutally taken away in the house, and the killer could still have been hiding inside, making Kathy a potential target. Yet, Robert appeared calm and simply left, as if he knew nothing bad would happen to his wife. The main suspect and new evidence. After several unproductive months, the police finally identified a primary and sole suspect, Robert Zai. It was discovered that he had a key to his brother-in-law's house, which Min had given him just in case, shortly before the tragedy. Curiously, Robert never mentioned this during interrogations, and Kathy was unaware that her brother had given her husband a key. Brenda unknowingly revealed this crucial detail to the investigators. Further investigation revealed that Robert's claim of being a successful ENT doctor was a facade. While he did possess a medical degree, he never held a stable job in the field. Rumors suggested he fled to Australia to avoid punishment for alleged bribery charges in China. In Australia, Robert failed to establish himself professionally, squandering the last of his savings on unsuccessful business ventures. After moving to North Epping, he became essentially idle, relying on his wife's income and occasional financial assistance from Kathy's relatives. Once the guardianship papers for Brenda were finalized, Robert acted as if he had inherited the Lynn family's estate. His first move was to force Yun's parents out of the house that Min had bought for them, though it was legally under the deceased's name. Min and Kathy's parents remained in the house bought for them. Considering these facts and circumstances, investigators theorized that Robert was driven by intense envy of his wife's more successful and wealthy relatives, harboring a long-standing plan to seize their property, money, and lucrative business. Despite living under the same roof as the perpetrator of the crime against her family, Brenda and Kathy weren't considered in immediate danger.
Brenda was oblivious to the true nature of her cohabitant, while Kathy was needed by Robert to maintain control over the family's assets. However, the police couldn't arrest Robert yet due to lack of concrete evidence against him. Interrogation, surveillance, and arrest. The investigation team obtained permission to install several hidden cameras in the Z household, hoping to gather the evidence needed to prove Robert's guilt. The breakthrough came sooner than expected, starting with an unsuspecting revelation by Kathy during an interrogation. Kathy mentioned her husband's preference for a particular brand of shoes. A few years back, Robert had purchased 2 pairs of sneakers from a limited edition series that he particularly liked. He had worn out and discarded one pair, but the other was still carefully stored in its box at their home. Notably, Robert wore size 9.5 shoes, the same size as the killer's. The key evidence came when Robert was captured on one of the hidden cameras, meticulously destroying the box of the aforementioned shoes. This footage led to a warrant to search the suspect's home, where a new pair of size 9.5 sneakers was found. The tread pattern on these shoes matched the prints found at the crime scene. Additionally, a small smeared trace resembling blood was discovered in his garage. Forensic analysis confirmed that it was indeed a bloodstain containing the DNA of all 5 Lynn family victims, literally linking it to the crime scene. This evidence led to Robert's arrest, finally providing the concrete proof the police needed to take action. Arrest, trial, and shocking revelations. In May 2011, 2 years after the tragic incidents, evidence led to Robert Z.'s arrest. He vehemently denied any involvement, claiming the blood found in his garage appeared after their return from the Lynn house. He also dismissed the significance of the sneakers with matching tread patterns found in his possession, asserting they were brand new and that he had immediately disposed of the old pair. While awaiting trial in prison for 3 years, Robert unknowingly shared cells with several informants. In one such conversation, he confessed to meticulously planning the crime and carefully covering his tracks. He mentioned buying the lethal weapon in a remote store without surveillance cameras and drugging his wife with sedatives in tea to prevent her from waking up and noticing his absence. He disposed of the hammer, sneakers, gloves, and clothing in a manner that ensured they would never be found. At the trial, Robert denied everything, and the only evidence against him were the statements from his cellmates and the previously mentioned indirect evidence. As a result, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, and Robert was released on bail in December 2015. The trial resumed in June 2016 with testimony from another informant, who claimed Robert confessed to an obsession with Brenda since she was 13. This led to a re-examination of Brenda, who tearfully admitted that Robert had coerced her into a sexual relationship shortly after she started living with them. Fearing retaliation, she had remained silent about the abuse for years. With these revelations and considering other evidence, Robert Z. was found guilty on all charges. He received 5 life sentences, 1 for each fatal crime, without the possibility of parole. All his subsequent appeals were rejected. Fear is a negative and unpleasant feeling. Would anyone want to experience it over and over again? Cassandra and her twin brother Rob were the exception. As young children, they couldn't go a day without the scary stories they liked to tell each other in a room with the lights off. Rob was a natural storyteller, or at least he thought he was. Cassandra would scream at every story he told, and he, playing the brave though small man, would sprawl on his bed mumbling, "You can't even scare the neighbor's little Joey with stories like that. No, scary stories are not your thing." They also watched the animated series Scooby-Doo together, and while watching it, they argued over which of the characters in the story would turn out to be a ghost or a vampire in disguise. Cassandra's intuitive guesses were often ahead of her brother, and then he was nervous. Their mother, Mary Smith, although she did not share the passion of the twins, but to instill in her children a love of reading, bought them books by Robert Wall. Love for scary stories was not a childhood hobby, but a passion that brother and sister carried through life. They even collected figurines of villains, and as adults, seriously considered opening a themed store associated with this culture of horror. An interest in horror movies brought Cassandra to the set in 2004. She got a cameo in a scary movie that, although it didn't become popular, still caused a storm of envy in Rob, and he started asking his sister to make a deal for him. "You must have made some acquaintances there, right? I'm ready to play any one. Well, talk, CAs, please." "I'm pretty close with the head of the cast. Maybe something will come out of it, but no promises. I got the part by accident myself, after all." Cassandra replied. Roby was very happy, but to play, albeit in an episodic role, he was not able to. The head of the cast in that movie was Colin Dudley, and on the set between him and debuting actress flashed a spark. To make the first step, each of them did not dare. That all changed during a corporate Halloween party. Cassandra dressed up as Velma from Scooby-Doo, and Colin dressed up as Alex from A Clockwork Orange. And if for Cassandra, the image of the cartoon character was just an image, then, for Colin Dudley, it seemed, he was something more. He was walking with a glass of milk all evening, looking at everyone with a glare just as his character did in the movie, and also, he talked a lot of quotes from the book. For example, looking at Cassandra with delight, he said, "Beauty invariably caused my only desire to destroy it, for it did not fit at all into our ugly world." Cassandra thought it was a compliment, and they soon began dating, but their relationship didn't last long, only a couple months. Colin found another actress, Rebecca, and started dating her, and later on the couple started living together. August 25th, 2020. Cassandra Cantrell disappeared. She, without warning anyone, drove her car away from home in an unknown direction and did not answer phone calls. The police officers were very reluctant to take a report from her mother for a very long time, trying to calm the poor woman down and saying that sometimes children grow up and don't always warn their parents when they go out with friends. But Mary Smith was sure that something terrible had happened, and maybe if the lazy cops would finally start working, she would still have a chance to see her daughter alive. The search for Cassandra did not begin until 2 days later, and on the third day, the police found her car under a bridge, not in the most favorable area. Also, to add to the bad news, the car was unlocked, and the keys were inside. It was impossible to understand what Cassandra was doing here. This place was considered a neighborhood of homeless people, where with frequent frequency the police found their bodies, killed in a domestic fight, or died of an overdose of illegal drugs. The officers had to go around the neighborhood, questioning a lot of homeless people who, at the sight of the police, tried to get away for a while, but it was all to no avail. None of them had seen Cassandra, and none of them knew when the car showed up here. It was hard to expect anything else from the residents who lived under the bridge and drank alcohol all day long. The detective involved in the search for Cassandra had requested her cell phone billing, as he was instructed to do, but from experience he was sure it would get him nowhere. So it did. The signal showed that the phone was in the nearest body of water to the bridge, which meant that the detectives would not be able to recover it and get the information they needed. Nevertheless, a team of divers began searching the coastal area, and before they did so, standing on the shore, they picked up rocks from the ground and threw them into the water, testing how far they could throw the phone. Cassandra's mother said that her missing daughter's phone case was decorated with rhinestones, which meant it would not be difficult to find. Indeed, the phone was soon found, but Cassandra's body was not in the water. This was presented to her mother as good news, but the poor woman did not feel any better. She seemed to have gotten used to the idea that her daughter was dead, and the only thing she wanted was for her body to be found, and for this nightmare of uncertainty to end. I was looking forward to my granddaughter. I wanted to be a grandmother sooner, and I didn't even have time to give her a crib. It's just sitting in the garage in a box. What should I do with it now? Saddened the mother, and did not realize that this became important information for the investigation. According to statistics, a high percentage of crimes against pregnant women are committed by their partners, the fathers-to-be. But Mary Smith did not know who the father of her future granddaughter was. Cassandra, as it seemed to her, despite her already realized age, was not married and did not even meet anyone. It was understandable that she had gotten pregnant by a man, but Mary had no information about the potential father of the child. Although, again from the words of her mother, her daughter very often corresponded with someone and called, but the phone number of her interlocutor for some reason was not recorded in the daughter's book, and the mother, of course, did not remember the numbers. She just noticed that it is quite strange to communicate so often with a person and not write down his number. Girls, as it was known, could not keep their relationships in absolute secrecy, and there should be at least one friend with whom Cassandra shared her secrets, and especially if those secrets were related to pregnancy. And such a friend was found. In a conversation with police officers, she revealed that Cassandra had rekindled her relationship with her former boyfriend, Colin Dudley. Yes, their past relationship in 2004 was short-lived, and besides, it's been 15 years since their breakup. It is strange in general that after so much time they remembered each other. As it turned out, Colin himself came out to Cassandra, with whom he once worked on a movie set. In 2014, he found Cassandra on Facebook, wrote some warm words, and confessed that just recently his father died, with whom his wife, Rebecca, had a difficult relationship, and so he had no one to share his grief with. Cassandra, purely because of friendly motives, decided to meet and talk to the ex-boyfriend to calm him down, but the friendly meeting turned into something more. Since 2014, Colin began to live literally on two families, where Cassandra was in the status of mistress. When the young woman found out that she was pregnant, she did not want to inform Colin Dudley, because every time she wanted to admit it to him, she recalled their conversation where Colin said that he absolutely did not want children, and that he was very happy about Rebecca being infertile. The news that he might have a daughter or son could destroy a real family, and Cassandra didn't want to hurt her lover, so she kept the news a secret. Meanwhile, her belly was growing, and it was impossible to hide it under the oversized sweaters, and in order to Colin did not guess anything, Cassandra stopped seeing him. But how to move on? She couldn't hide it for long, and if she lied about having another boyfriend, it would hurt Colin and cause them to break up. Cassandra decided that the bitter truth was better than a sweet lie, so she told Colin over the phone that she was expecting a child with him. Colin was silent for a while, and then he finally said that he was delighted to hear the news. It sounded very strange, but Cassandra concluded that Colin was genuinely pleased. The detective arrived at Colin's house, knocked on the door, and his wife opened it. Deciding that it wasn't quite ethical to talk about a missing mistress in the presence of Colin's legal wife, the detective introduced himself as an old friend of Dudley's. Colin came out, immediately shut the door behind him, and walked away from the house with the detective, though the latter hadn't even introduced himself yet. It was as if he had been waiting for this meeting. "Thank you for not making your credentials public in front of Rebecca. You're a man of honor, a true officer. My compliments to you." Colin spoke in short sentences. "I heard Cassandra is missing. It's weird, bloody weird. I can't even guess where she might have gone. She told me she'd had a big fight with her brother and was really worried about it. I advised her to stop by and make up with him. I don't know if she listened to me or not. That Cassandra and Rob had been in a fight, the detective knew. Rob had told him about it himself. It was nothing serious, just a family misunderstanding, but nevertheless, Cassandra's twin brother had been very upset about it, because the day she disappeared, Cassandra had called him and wanted to come and talk to him, but his proud brother had refused, and now he blamed himself for it. If his sister had come to see him that day, she wouldn't have disappeared. You know, officer, I'm not the nicest person. I think you realize that. Dating my ex-girlfriend in secret from my wife, and for such a long period of time, I'm sure I'll be punished for it in the next world. But the human heart doesn't decide who you fall in love with. In 2014, my father died. He literally hated Rebecca with all his soul, and the feeling was mutual. But he really liked Cassandra. He often remembered her, reproached me for the fact that we broke up with her almost immediately after Christmas. We often fight with our parents, accusing them of not understanding. And then it turns out that it's us, their children, who don't understand, and it hurts. My father was right, of course, and after he died, I just wanted to fulfill one of his wishes, and so I resumed my relationship with Cassandra. Rebecca needed to be broken up with. It was a conversation I kept putting off. You know, this family stuff sucks you dry, so I kept stalling. I've been living a double life for 5 years. It was hell. I had to make excuses for coming home late all the time. To hide it, I'd tell her about some fictitious business trips and even bought a fishing rod, even though I hated fishing, a stupid pastime. And I'd tell Rebecca I was going to the lake while I went to Cassandra's. Before coming home, I'd buy fish at the supermarket for extra convincing, and Rebecca would bake it in the oven and I'd eat it, even though the smell of fish makes me sick. Did you know Cassandra was pregnant? What? Pregnant? By whom? I don't have that information, but she told a close friend of hers that it was from you. That can't be true. She's been adamantly refusing to see me lately, and I guess I understand her and can't blame her for that. Naturally, she was tired of being in the background and wanted a family, which unfortunately I couldn't give her. I guess that the reason she refused to see me was because she had found someone else. When was the last time you saw her? Asked Detective Colin. Honestly, I can't even remember. I think it was about 3 months ago, maybe 4 if you don't count the time we literally ran into her at the mall by chance. But that was fleeting because my wife was in the fitting room, and I just got tired of waiting for her and decided to take a walk to the coffee shop. Tell me, officer, is there any chance you'll find her alive? Dudley asked one last time. We're doing everything we can. Believe me. This was not Colin's last encounter with the detective. even though Cassandra's phone, which was lifted from the bottom of the pond and could not be recovered, but the police requested the details of the calls of the missing person, and it turned out that most likely the unsigned number about which her mother told her belongs to Colin Dudley. Most often Cassandra called him, and even on the day of her disappearance, they called each other. In addition, on that day, the police received CCTV footage from the train station near the bridge, where Cassandra's abandoned car had been found, and on it they saw a strange man who stood out in the crowd of passengers on the platform. He wore a long cloak, gloves, his face was swathed in a scarf, and a hat was placed on his head, the sides of which covered his eyes. It was impossible to make out the face, but the detective said that the man's gait reminded him very much of Colin Dudley. As for the hat, it was almost identical to the one worn by Alex from A Clockwork Orange. After continuing to follow the strange man through the CCTV cameras, the detectives noticed that he literally went into the cafe for a few minutes, then came out of there and went towards the parking lot, where he got into his car and drove away. During all this time, the stranger never showed his face, but they could see the license plate number of the car in which the stranger got into, and the car belonged to Colin Dudley. A unit was sent to his house with a search warrant. The detectives had hope that Cassandra was alive and in the basement at Dudley's house. At first, there was no evidence of a murder at Colin's house, but in the closet they found the very hat Colin was trying to cover himself with. They then went down to the basement, but Cassandra was not there, nor was there any evidence of the crime. However, the service dog, which was trained to search by the scent of blood, barked as it sniffed the couch, and that was already a very alarming bell. Colin assured that he had done nothing illegal, that the police simply had no evidence and no other suspects, so they were trying to pin the crime on him, an innocent man. The detective interviewed his wife, who of course was shocked at what was going on in their home, at the accusations against her husband, and at the fact that she had been deceived for years. Yes, she could say a lot of things about her husband and her emotions, but when the detective asked her if her husband was capable of murder, she, after thinking about it for a long time, answered in the negative. All the evidence that had been found against Colin wasn't enough to put him in jail, which made Rob and Mary Smith very angry, and the detective was just throwing up his hands. Colin was called in for questioning again. He thought carefully about the crime as he had an alibi for all the allegations. On the morning of August 25th at 6:30 a.m., Colin visited a hardware store where he purchased household cleaning chemicals as well as trash bags. And indeed, the store's cameras confirmed it, but the large trash bags overshadowed this situation. Colin then received a text message from Cassandra that she was almost at his house, but he immediately deleted the message, but it remained in the cell phone carrier's memory, and the police got it from the call and message dump. Also, according to their cell phone billing, the couple did not leave the house that morning for several hours. Colin then turned off his phone, but left his mistress's phone on, most likely by accident, and police saw the entire path of his movements, including where he was seen on the station's CCTV cameras. As the police already knew, after the cafe, where he was probably recovering from the murder by washing up in the toilet, Colin got into his car and drove to the pond where he had dumped Cassandra's phone, where the last signal from the cell phone had been received. It was now necessary to search for Cassandra's body. The police, in order to accurately track the route, seized a GPS tracker from Colin's car. The device completely replicated the movement of Cassandra's cell phone signal, but there was new evidence in the case based on his movements the next day. The cops retraced his path that went through the woods, and there in a ravine they spotted a huge trash can tied with ropes. All the ground around it was covered in blood, and it became clear what was in the container. Yeah, they were right. By then, it had been a month since the murder, and identifying the body was difficult. The police were helped by Cassandra's tattoo, which was described in the search notes. Colin was apprehended the same day and charged with murder. Forensics conducted a forensic examination and indicated that death was caused by a fractured skull due to blunt force trauma. During the examination of the basement of the Dudley house, the police found traces of blood, which could not be completely cleaned. Rebecca knew nothing about the murder. All day she spent in another part of the house, from which no noise in the basement cannot be heard. and she also confirmed that Colin never wanted children, and his story about her infertility, just a fiction. The police took this as a motive for the crime. During the trial, due to the lack of witnesses, physical evidence, such as the murder weapon, it was impossible to convince the jury that the murder was committed by Colin Dudley. Then, the court made a deal with the killer that if he pleaded guilty, he would get a lesser sentence. Colin was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Cassandra's mother and her brother, who still felt guilty that he had not agreed to meet with his sister before her death, were very upset, because the killer would most likely live to see the moment when he could go free.